And so with that, anybody who's here this evening who would like to speak to citizen public communication, which means you can speak to anything, whether it's on the agenda or not, you can speak to a specific agenda item, or you could also speak to something that is in the admin report. And if anybody would like to speak during citizen comments, if you would please raise your hand, and you will then be given 4 minutes to speak. Councilmember Rosengarten, did you want to speak during citizen comments? Or did I just forget to lower your hand? Helen Bessie, did you want to speak during citizen comments?
I'm sorry, I thought I had the microphone.
Did you need to speak during citizen comments, Councilmember Rosengarten?
Yes, please.
Okay, you have the floor.
I started speaking and didn't realize that I was then muted right afterwards. My conversation is about whether or not we have to be on video or not be on video. We at Sunset Valley only got video access October 21st, 2008. That was the first time there ever was video. Prior to that, it was audio. So I've heard the statement time and time again that if we're not on video, we can't be trusted. I'm here, I'm in front of my computer the whole time, just like I was at the dais. I look the same here as I did at the dais. I prefer to look at the agenda items and the presentations, and I have two computers in front of me. So the most you would see is the side of my face because I'd be looking at my big monitor. So I want you to know that Westlake, and I verified that again today, does only phone conversation. They don't even have an agenda posted so everybody can see it that chimes in. It's a black screen that you look at or listen to. And I did a very good job of listening to the whole thing today of their last council meeting. And it went great. So thank you. But this is my computer. I can decide if I want to take a break and not be in front of the camera, but be looking at my monitor instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosengarten. And I will go back now to Helen. Helen, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Because I had a lot of trouble last night.
We can, and I was there last night. No, you are crystal clear right now.
Oh, good, thank you. All right, so first of all, I want to thank all of you who are showing yourselves. I really appreciate that. And I do want to just say that I appreciate Rudy's comments, and that is her privilege to do that. However, I will also say I don't live in Westlake, so I don't care what Westlake does. I do live in Sunset Valley, but it's a free country, so unless you have a ordinance or some administrative policy, no one can be forced to be on camera. And again, I appreciate that. I will say that our meeting last night at P&E was so much more productive, I think, because we could mostly see each other, although nobody could hear me. And well, that's enough. I don't need to say any more than that. But anyway, thank you to the four of you who are on camera. And I'm very happy that Mr. Bonchek is here. I was reading the comments in the administrative report, and I also made a statement on line, but I don't know that anybody saw it because I was so late with it this afternoon. It seems like it would be a very easy answer as to whether Williamson Creek is a navigable waterway or not, just by asking our attorney. Although I know there's a lot of ins and outs of how that law is gone. I was caught by that same law myself 40 years ago when I tried to canoe down a river, and the landowner said that I could get on the river, but I couldn't get out of my boat. And if I had an accident, he could come shoot me as he was standing there with his shotgun, because his river was granted by a land grant. And there are not that many rivers in Texas that are still under the land grant system, I don't think. At any rate, I'm very glad that Mr. Bonchek is here. And I also just want to say that I'm a little bit disappointed in the city and the way that the whole email stream was handled in terms of the response from our police department, and whether they did not say whether they talked to the resident or not, but I would think now in this time of great stress that that would be a good thing for our department to have done. Let's see. Well, I have comments on agenda item 8 and agenda item 9. Shall I wait till then?
If you can stick with us, you can have an additional 4 minutes on each of those items, or if you want to not stick around, you still have time now.
Okay, thank you. No, I'll listen. I don't have anything else to do tonight. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Helen. Sorry, I was trying to mute whoever was enjoying the outdoors. That was a good transition, and actually, I'd like to also, I would like to lighten the conversation about being on camera or off camera. I think both sides of it are really great, and I actually do, I love that I get to see Wanda and Sylvia, Melissa and Karen right now. I don't have any makeup on. I don't look good right now. I want to be really honest and say I just don't want to have to turn my camera on if I don't want to. I'm also in my private space. I'm in my private home. And I'm sure some of you, there's at least one person listening right now that has some empathy of what it's like to be a volunteer leader in the community, where people sometimes threaten you or they feel anger or hatred towards you. And sometimes it is because of something I've said or done, but sometimes it's also just because of the position. I personally, right now, as we're in a temporary state of trying to make the best with what we have, hoping to get back into City Hall as soon as possible, I would ask that you at least just try to consider what it's like to be in my shoes, and respect that I don't really want to open up my personal home, my personal space anymore than I have to. And when I ran for office, putting my home, the inside of my home, on camera is not part of what I signed up for. City Hall does not pay for any of my equipment, and in 10 years, I have missed 2 meetings. That's 2. So if there is somebody who really doesn't trust me, or questions my integrity, or questions whether or not I'm actually participating in the meeting or moderating the meeting, man, I can't even really tell you how much that really is just a personal blow to me. And I have read all the comments, and I did read the comments that came in late. And Sylvia, I actually want to thank you also for the open town hall, because for me that's been helpful. I actually, on council days, I find myself checking it hourly, and even when you post the agenda, I really personally, I like it better than when residents and others would email me their comments. I really do like the public aspect of it, and I like that I'm no longer the holder or responsible of making sure that those comments get made, shared with other people. Helen, there was one thing you mentioned, and just since it is Roxana's first night, I want to make sure that everybody knows she did actually prepare a memo. So for the item that relates to public-private use, Sylvia did actually have the attorney produce a memo. I'm not sure if that came after the agenda was posted. It is not a simple question. I do want us to very much respect the trail user who's not a resident. And I also want to make sure that council members and residents realize, if you read through the feedback, you'll see that there's another resident that hit on why I wanted this to be discussed tonight, which this isn't just about one incident or one property owner or one trail. This is something that council members and residents should be very aware of, which is the perception of private property and whether or not that private property may have some public use access. And so with that, I'm going to allow James to speak. And James, you have 4 minutes to say whatever you would like to say.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for having me. I'm actually going to share my webcam. And this isn't what I prepared to say, but I have worked for a virtual company, globally distributed, for the last 5 years. And my team has found that webcams have improved our communication tenfold. So here I am. You can see my face and my facial reactions. I'm here today. Thanks for hearing what I have to say about Williamson Creek. My statement and email chain pretty much say everything that I needed to say. The only thing I wanted to add was encouraging anyone reviewing navigability to review the map that I provided in my statement as a visual aid. Secondly, I just want to echo Helen's comments. I think they're great, and I think they're really spot on. Two simple solutions to find closure on a complicated matter. Talking to the property owner and reaching out to the mayor, the city attorney. That's all I have. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, James. And James did, if council members or anybody who's listening this evening, he did post in our open town hall. So he posted there in addition to the information that is in the agenda. And James, I would encourage you to stick around at least until we get through our citizen public communication to see if there's any other information on this topic that may be helpful to you. And with that, Sylvia, what would you like to add to this topic in terms of what council has or has not received so far?
Myself. Council did receive the city attorney's opinion that essentially says it is at this point a civil matter. The courts do have to make that determination, and Mr. Bonchek, the site that you provided was very clear in that the courts make a ruling. There's no master list. So one of the things to look for is, has Williamson Creek been determined to be a navigable waterway besides just the width? Has there been a court case? We've not been able to find anything thus far. And so the city attorney did issue a CARS item to the city council. So the question to the city council is going to be, shall we as a city intervene in a civil matter between a property owner and a public person who wants to navigate along that waterway?
And I want to allow Roxana a heads up that I'm going to ask her to speak, and she may already have something prepared on this. And so normally when we have citizen public communication, the person who speaks can speak, but council cannot engage or ask questions. But in this situation, it's also posted on the admin report in the posted agenda, so there was sufficient notice. So council members, if you do have questions for either James, who's attending our meeting this evening, or for staff, or for Roxana, now would be a great time to do that. One question that I had for either Sylvia or Roxana would be, please correct me if I'm wrong. The way I understand this is that we've never had this question come up before, or if so, not in the 10 years that I've been serving. In the interim, is this trail user allowed to use that space? And am I reading it correctly that there would have to be a civil suit, an injunction, or a final judgment of some sort that would give the clarity and direction? And that in the interim, who has the right? Does the property owner have the right to say you can't be there, or does the trail user have the right to say until you prove otherwise, I do?
I'm going to let Roxy answer that.
Okay, so Roxana, I have unmuted
Can you hear me? Okay.
We sure can.
All right. So, and a caveat is that the memo and the information I have is extremely limited in trying to answer this question. And I'm not saying that that Mr. Bonchek didn't provide us information. He provided us a lot of good information. I just don't have access to land plans, land grants, all sorts of things like that. But the general question that I looked at with the information that I had provided to me within the emails from Mr. Bonchek are whether that dry creek bed located on that address is something that trail users may utilize. I think that State versus Bradford, that Supreme Court case, is pretty clear that it comes down to an issue of navigability, and the city itself does not have the authority to declare that something is navigable. Therefore, whether by statute or by because of the water in it, and therefore we cannot really make that call. It clearly states that a court has to make that call. So when I saw that, I started doing research and said, okay, well, maybe this issue has already come up before the courts, And I was not able to find in my research any kind of judicial declaration that the Williamson Creek as a whole or any part of it is navigable. That's not saying that it's not. I just haven't seen or was able to find a judicial declaration. I also was not able to find any kind of state agency declaration that it was navigable. So the city at this point is unable to answer that question. And that's why it falls back to a civil matter, basically being a trespass matter. In light of the information we have, even if if it was an issue of trespass, I don't believe that the police department would even have enough information to be able to determine whether there was a criminal trespass violation.
Roxana, as a follow-up, what would you, as even just, you can put whatever caveat you want, what advice would you give to Sylvia, the police chief, and myself? And part of why I wanted this to be discussed openly is that this relates to James and his incident and his desire to use, not just desire, his desire and his belief that he has a right to use that space, but it relates to many other properties in our city.
Right.
What should we do in the interim?
So in the interim, we can try to have a little bit more communication with the property owner and the person trying to use it. But ultimately, it becomes an issue as to whether the city wants to get involved in a civil matter to determine whether somebody's portion of what they believe to be a private property, whether it's public. And there's two things that are very important here. Number one, protecting the public's right to use public property. And number two, not taking private property without the proper authority. And those are the two main issues that we're dealing and grappling with here. And at this point, I just want you to understand we don't have enough information, and it's going to be whether the city wants to get involved in seeking a declaratory judgment from a court to seek that, which is something that you could do as a city. But of course, that would entail filing fees, attorney's fees, etc. But that would come up with an answer to that question.
And Roxana, if we were to do that as a city, because you're, and this again relates much less to this specific issue and more to what I'm looking at, which is, have we maybe kicked a rock that may apply to many other private property owners? And
right.
Would the smart way for the city to do this, if we were going to seek such action from the court to provide clarity to both the police chief, private property owners, and also potential trail users, would the smart way to approach this be to do it for the whole city? So to have a judgment that covers all of our private properties that have any type of access of this sort?
I would absolutely, in terms of being economically and judicially efficient, absolutely, I would include any kind of, if you're looking at dry creek beds or creeks or other areas within private property that we would want a declaration on, I would include that in there.
And then this may be more of a question for Sylvia and the police chief. So that we make sure that private property owners know about this, if they're not paying attention to agendas or here this evening, what could and should we do to communicate with them? And then also to ensure that we're being safe and providing, I don't know, just doing the right thing for people who use our public spaces. What would be the best practice for what we should do from today moving forward until some sort of civil process takes place?
Well, I think first identifying where all of these instances exist within the city, and we can do that with a simple GIS layer, and then have some sort of communication with the residents about the potential for a public quote unquote trespass along the property. But other than that, I would just caution on, the city's entrance into a private dispute among property.
And so Sylvia, Roxana, would the other, in terms of what we're communicating to residents, should we be setting up the expectation that the city would endeavor to do this on behalf of city and public space users? Or is this something where we need to clearly communicate to residents, if you guys want to do this, you need to collate yourselves, pool your money, and decide how you want to pursue this case without the city's assistance? Which goes to what you're saying, Sylvia. It's more of a public-private property, not public city property issue.
Yeah, yes. On its face and the issues that are presented, this is more of a civil matter between a property owner and another citizen. I would absolutely give feedback that, whether you want to endeavor in seeking a declaratory action to determine whether these, the things such as a dry creek bed and et cetera are public and trail users can use it. That would be a policy decision that the city council would have to make. And I would absolutely recommend that you get public comment, especially from the people that are going to be affected, before making that decision.
Right. And Councilmember Gonzalez, I see that your hand is up. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just also want to be clear as we proceed, and speaking to Roxy, thank you for being here, and hi, Doug, too. We have a lot of different pieces of Williamson Creek. I know we have at least 2. Is it up to 3 branches of Williamson Creek in our boundaries? Does anybody know?
I cannot answer that question. I don't know if
Okay, well, I know we have at least 2 branches of Williamson Creek. I think it possibly could be 3 within our boundaries. And so there's going to be potentially even different decisions if this were to proceed, where you might get one is navigable and one is not. And so it's a complicated issue. And so I think if we're going forward, we certainly would want to be really clear about how many branches were affected. And so I do think it's a bit of a fraught issue, and not like we have one creek, we'd have one decision, we could have 2 or 3 decisions. So I just want to point that out to people as they consider this. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Doug. I didn't see until Councilmember Gonzalez mentioned it that you're here also. Thank you. Do we have anybody else? I do see we have 2 other people who want to speak during citizen public communication, and you may want to speak to this issue and others. If there's anybody else who wants to speak to this issue, especially if there are council members, if you would raise your hand. And Chief Carter, you have the floor.
Good evening. This is Chief Carter. I wanted to make sure that everybody's clear on this particular property. These 2 properties at the end of Pillow. These aren't along the boundary line of anyone's property. This creek bed goes directly underneath the 2 front driveways of this property, and both these properties are fenced in with no trespassing signs, so that I can't get down to the property and enforce it if there is trespassing. That was why I told Mr. Bonchek that he needs to remain off the property in order to until this is resolved. There's just no way for me to enforce any trespass on the property because it's fenced in, and he's not entering from Sunset Valley. He's entering from somewhere else along the property. And again, this goes directly across the front driveway of 2 homes. I spoke to the homeowner today. He has children. He's just uncomfortable with strangers walking across his front driveway. And he has had to speak to several people about doing that. And so in the interim, the police department is going to enforce the trespassing, that is trespassing on this man's property until there's some sort of judgment or otherwise. I'm under the understanding that no part of Williamson Creek is navigable. I'm working with Texas Parks and Wildlife to get a definitive answer for that, but I don't believe that there's any part of Williamson Creek that is navigable. And again, if this were along the back boundary line or a side property line, I would probably look at this differently, but this goes directly across the front driveways of these homes. And again, that is not just Mr. Bonchek. That would mean that anyone can just walk back and forth on these properties. And so I don't think that's a very good situation for the property owners.
Thank you, Chief. For me, that was very clear. And Roxana, I would ask you, now that you've sort of heard the context of the trail user, which again really isn't about James, although he's the one that brought this up. It's really about anybody who might be using it, or even in other properties. But then now also listening to the chief and understanding it, what would be the best approach for us as a city to do in the interim? Should we follow what the chief has said and say we will impose trespassing guidelines by request of private property owners, and then it's up to the private property owner and the trail user to take it to court if they want to resolve it, unless council chooses to take over that action?
Yeah, when I was kind of preparing into this transition, one of the things that I did was look at the ordinances setting up the police department, and one of the duties is to keep the peace. With regards to trespassing, there's two different kinds of trespassing. There's criminal trespass and there's civil trespass. And at this point, with so many questions surrounding whether that area is public or private, I don't believe that the police department has enough information to determine whether there was a criminal trespass, therefore leaving a civil trespass action available. So that would be, again, a civil action either sought by the property owner or the person trying to access the property. And like I said, there's two main issues here. The right to a public area, which is still in question. And secondly, the right of the private property owner to not have part of what he believes his private property be taken. So those are the two main issues. And at this point, if there's a way that we can keep the peace, if there's another avenue or other way to get to the green belts or wherever the people are trying to get to, I would recommend doing that in the interim and trying to figure that out.
And so to the issue of civil versus criminal, if you're suggesting that it's purely civil at this point, does the police department even have any authority?
Well, the police department has authority to keep the peace and to try to maintain the peace between the citizens. But as I said, with for instance, on this particular incident, and there's going to be different facts for different scenarios, but in this particular scenario, there's not enough information to determine whether there was a criminal trespass violation. So in Mr. Bonchek's and the property owner situation, it would most likely be a civil trespass issue. And until that's determined, then you can determine whether there was a criminal trespass. It's just not clear cut and enough I don't think it would meet the elements for a criminal trespass violation at this point, or we don't have enough facts. And Mr. Bonachek brought very good information. But the deal is that that's all information and about the facts that would support or not support whether it's navigable or not. And again, the city does not have the authority, according to Texas law, to make that determination. That determination can only be made by a court. And that'd be a district court, an appellate court, or the Supreme Court.
All of that makes sense to me. I have one last question. So taking that hypothetical or that potential legal action out, different chapter. If we have a resident who has a clear plat that has been filed with Travis County that shows where their boundary lines are, and they want to defend the rights they feel that they have on their property to protect their family, how do we as a city, how does our police department not so much navigate the issue of trespass, but navigate the issue of protection of private property in a situation like this?
Well, if there's enough facts surrounding, here we have a question on whether that dry creek bed is a public right of way. If we have a scenario where somebody just has an acre of land and it's all platted and private to them, and somebody encroaches on that and they're told to leave, or there's no trespassing signs posted, or whatever the elements are that are listed, there's enough information there. Here, there happens to be a question on that particular dry creek bed, and that's where we're at. And there's no way that we can provide a clear answer today, and I don't know that ultimately we could provide a clear answer without some sort of judicial determination.
And Chief, I just want to make sure I understood what you said correctly. In this scenario, the issue for the resident, the Sunset Valley resident, is that an individual that is unknown to them is crossing within their private fence across their driveway?
That's correct. There's a fenced gateway from the Sunset Valley side, and there's signs that say no trespassing. And this goes to the creek bed. His driveway is paved over the top of the creek bed. So you literally are walking across his front driveway, across 45 and 50 Pillow. So if he's outside, if his children are outside, any time of day, strangers would be walking across his front yard through his gate. I mean, he's got a gated fence.
And this potential trail traffic that you're painting, the image you're painting for us, that the traffic would be on the public or private side of their fence?
It would be all within his property line. The fence is at the very beginning of his property.
Right.
He has a gated fence. It
Right.
would be back behind that area. And both residents have complained about incidents that have gone on back there. He's recently had his car burglarized. He's had his children out there where people were behaving oddly or under the influence. Again, if this were just at the back of his property or on some side boundary line, the police department would look at it differently. But we're basically trying to prevent something from occurring, a disturbance or something like that. That's why, until this is resolved, it would make more sense for Mr. Boncheck and others to avoid going across these people's front yard.
Thank you. And that's why I asked that last question to the city attorney, which is, in a situation where people do know their boundary lines and they feel like they are defending their family or their private property, to what extent do we as a city respond to that, or what should the police department be doing?
Well, at this point, a lot of the information that the chief just provided, I unfortunately didn't have. I didn't have a chance to go out and look there, and I didn't know what the site looked like. But I think, like I said, the duty of the police department is to keep the peace, and there's some other, activity going on someone's private property. They have the full right to go out to calls and investigate complaints and do their due diligence and determine on a case-by-case basis whether there's anything that can be done. Now, during that investigation, the thing is, to ask people to take the reasonable way, or to think reasonable, act reasonably, and not escalate the situation. And I think that's what I agree with the chief on that.
Council members, do we have any other comments or questions on this before I move to the next individual who wants to speak during citizen comments? Any other council members who want to speak? Mark Wells, you have the floor. It looks like there you go. We can hear you now. You have the floor.
Okay. Yes. First rabbit out of the hat. I'd like to say that I agree with the mayor and Councilmember Rosengarten. If y'all don't want to have the video part of your part of the meeting, I don't have a problem with that. So I don't really see what the issue is. I mean, if you don't want to have if you only want to have the audio portion of your meeting, what's the problem? You're there, you're doing the work, you don't have your makeup on, you're in your pajamas, whatever. I don't think it's an issue. And so anybody who's making an issue, I think it's wrong. Okay. So anyway, so I agree with the mayor and Councilmember Rosengarten on that. As far as the trespassing, I'm not aware of any civil trespassing statute. Again, I haven't seen it. However, that issue is codified in the penal code, 30.05 to be exact. Okay, so that is criminal. And as a matter of fact, I don't have all the information on that particular case, but if I were that property owner, I would have no trespassing signs there, because then an officer, if they're called out, any law enforcement officer, if they were called out on that, they would be able to arrest on site without issue of warning. That's my understanding of it. And that's if it were me. But I'm not aware of any trespassing. Apparently, to me, from what I'm seeing, is clearly stated in it's enumerated in the penal code. I don't see any civil. I'm not aware of any civil statutes regarding trespassing. So again, I'd like to know what they would be, so I can do my research on that. But again, I'm not aware of it. But I agree with the chief. I think if the property owner, also and the mayor on this, if their plat is delineated, that's their private property, and somebody's trespassing on that, then I think that the way to solve that maybe would be if that person has been trespassing and they were given a notice, or notice was posted in the trespass. If that person were arrested, the trespasser, then I guess then it could be meted out in court. They could yeah. I mean, it would go to what I'm trying to say. It would be I mean that's one way that it could go as well. So but anyway, I would tend to like to see the rights of the property rights of the individual respected, and so anyway, I would just err on the side of caution with the person who is wanting to cross that person's private property, especially if it's fenced, and especially if there's signs up, things like that. And if that person may have fear of unknown people on his property, yeah. So anyway, I agree with the chief on that, and I agree with the mayor, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Goyette, you have the floor.
Yes, good evening. I appreciate the chief and what he had to say about taking a clear position on this matter. That sounds to me like trespassing. And I'm curious how a creek that's dry, probably 300 plus days a year, can be considered a navigable waterway. And I have one more question on this issue too, and that is I'd like to know with Mr. Boncheck, why is this so important to him? You know, that he infringe upon, sounds like he's infringing upon someone else's property. Why is that so important? Now, as far as what I wanted to say tonight, it's more on a procedural matter, and it has to do with the last regular city council meeting in calling the question. Now, I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but that's what's probably going to happen. So I'm going to go through what happened 2 weeks ago. And my problem is that I think city council needs to be aware of the power of calling the question and how disruptive calling the question can be. So let me just start off with it happened twice 2 weeks ago. The first time it happened was agenda item number 8, and that had to do with the interviewing of 2 law firms. And Councilmember Rosengarten calling the question, as far as I could tell, right in the middle of the interview, which I thought was, well, for lack of a better term, let's call it somewhat abrupt. No, and then it happened again during the residents saying their piece on agenda item number 12. Councilmember Rosengarten again called the question, and you know, at that time there was still residents waiting to speak, but it was a too bad type of issue because once the question is called, as Councilmember Rosengarten let all parties concerned know what the deal was with calling the question, that it immediately came to a vote on whether calling the question was appropriate. And if the majority ruled that it was, then that's the end of it. So let me just say then that, you know, I realized that the meeting deadline was fast approaching that evening, but I found it inconsiderate. Just cut the session short with no explanation. And I also want to make sure that the rest of the city council realizes that they could have denied that motion had they wanted to. So by virtue of allowing it to happen, not only did Councilmember Rosengarten basically tell the residents to shut up, but so did the rest of the council. So in the future, I mean, I think this caught everybody by surprise. So, you know, I'm not trying to, if I sound harsh, I'm not trying to sound harsh, and I'm not trying to sound too critical, but it is a powerful mechanism. And I would like the city council to consider how potent it is, number one, and also how important it is to never cut the resident's voice short, right? We get 4 minutes to speak on an issue. We get to say one time. Please let the people speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Is there anybody else who would like to speak during citizen comments this evening?
You like that?
Okay, seeing no additional comments, we can now move to reports, which again, we've touched on one item through citizen public communications that's listed in the admin report. For the mayor's dashboard, I don't have anything that I want to point out specifically other than to let council members know that we are now again at the decision as to whether or not we continue the every other Tuesday work sessions, which is currently requiring council to meet every single Tuesday. Based on the last work session, I would suggest that we go back to our, and also as a whole, as a country, state, and city transition back into normal business, I would recommend that we stop doing regular work sessions. But I wanted to pose this as a question to all of council to get feedback from others. So I would not suggest that we have a 5/26 work session. What I would instead suggest is that we redirect our attention outside of regular council meetings to committees, and that all of us participate more, even if it's just to attend and listen, and that we allow staff and Sylvia in particular to create training sessions around OpenGov and the new budget tools, and to provide any additional volunteer time that our residents want to give, including our committees, that we focus our energy on training sessions, true formal training where residents and committee members and council members are interacting with the tool over the next few weeks as we enter the next fiscal year's budget cycle. So I don't see any council members wanting to weigh in. And so with that, I will not call a work session for 5/26. And I will.
Councilmember Ellett, Mayor, Councilmember Ellett has his hand up.
Okay. Thank you. He's at the very bottom. Thank you. I didn't see it. Thank you, Sylvia. Councilmember Ellett. Now I lost you.
Yeah, am I back?
Thank
Am I
you.
there?
Yes. Sorry, I put your
Yeah.
hand down and then that made your name disappear. So
That's
yeah.
okay. All right. Thank you. I would agree on that as well. I think the work sessions were good. They were useful, and I would go along with your recommendation and not to have one on the 26th.
Thank you. Do we have any other input from council members on this topic? And so with that, I've already on the dashboard, if you're on it live, if you hit refresh, I've deleted the 526 meeting. And so we will now resume as a council our normal every other Tuesday. Sylvia and I will be putting out a bulletin this evening that highlights the additional orders that were released by the governor yesterday. And we will also announce our rollback into normal called meetings, which means we will go back to using Granicus as our audio recording and agenda tabbing system. And Sylvia, I would like, while we're on that topic, if you would let council know, one, how much we spend on that software and what upgrades have been made so that we make sure to utilize them when we go back to our new old normal.
Mayor, Councilmember Gonzalez has her hand up.
Okay, would you answer my question and then
Yes.
I'll take Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes, so we have paid, the old system that we had in council chambers was called IQM2. It was acquired by Granicus, so we were sort of in a caught must upgrade. That was an additional $9,000 to our base cost, which I believe was $12,000 a year at one point in time, or it may all be $12,000. I don't have the exact number in front of me. But what it has done is it had required us to upgrade our encoder, which is what translates the feed into digital so that we can have a better reception online. It also comes with a tabbing of the agenda. At some point we had that, it seemed to have gone away. And so now if you're going to go back to history on an agenda, you can go back directly to the audio and the tab and they'll be joined. And so you don't have to search entire feeds of audio. It also comes with something called iLegislate, which is an internal tool to help us better build agendas and agenda pieces. Right now, I wish that you guys could be on the back end on a Wednesday and realize how many hands are in the pot and how long it takes us to get an agenda out just through normal document sharing. So the audio, Austin Audio has come in, made changes and repairs to the audio system. The encoder has been upgraded. And so Granicus should be up and running by the time council comes back in session in the council chambers.
And that, what you just described, that is the audio digital recording, which also includes the archiving. So it's what,
Yes.
when a meeting ends, it's what allows you to archive.
Yes.
So what many residents may not understand, and certainly council can override me, and a future mayor, future council can override me, but I see absolutely no logic in us running parallel software programs, parallel archiving programs. So when we do roll back into meeting at City Hall, we are not going to be operating Granicus in parallel with open meeting, go-to meetings or something similar. So we're not going to be running digital subscription-based meetings in addition to our governmental subscription, which records and archives meetings. We're not going to do both. What council could do is choose to get rid of one. And if it wants to convert over to some sort of a virtual hybrid, I think that I have no opposition to that. However, council needs to think about it, needs to work with the city attorney, the city administrator. You need to set out a clear path and make sure there are clear ordinances before we would make a jump of that sort, which would include currently, I believe, the go-to meetings, you're archiving them through YouTube. Is that correct?
That's correct. The go-to meeting is, it's sufficient as a backup, but it is a rather onerous system. I mean, right now there are 3 of us on as organizers. One's monitoring the chat, one's monitoring the meeting, and the other's running the screen. So to have a go-to meeting in conjunction with a normal city council meeting, a Granicus meeting, where we're still also using a different computer to run the screen that the public is watching, is difficult. It will be very difficult.
Well, it's not, you're saying difficult. I want to be clear with the community. We're not doing that. And so if council wants to do that, somebody can sponsor that and say that they want to run parallel recording systems, parallel archiving systems, and make sure that it's very clear and understood the additional, not just staff bandwidth that takes, but the reality that we would then be creating 2 digital archives, and the city then has to determine which one is the correct one, which one is the official minutes, which one is the one that gets referenced in the future. And I can't imagine why it would be something other than Granicus, which means we should get rid of that 10,000 plus system that we pay for per year if we're not going to use it. Councilmember Gonzalez, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions on this. The first one, let me get this right, it sounds like you are imagining us being back in council chambers relatively soon. Is that true?
So based on the state orders, we could be back now. Based on Travis County orders, we could be back as soon as mid-June. I'm waiting for the chief and Sylvia to work with me to create what all 3 of us think is the best choice. But at this point, council chambers is certainly large enough that if we wanted to just have staff and council members, we have more than enough ability to space people 6 to 10 feet apart and hold those meetings. And so I think at this point we're looking at July. So yes, I mean, I would consider that soon. But no, not in the month of May or June.
Okay. That's my first question. My second one is kind of a comment. I was going to do it later, but then I wasn't sure I would be cut off. And I think now I have flexibility to address this. I'm concerned about the RFQ that is out for the performance audit. I don't individually consider that an essential service. And I'm concerned both that I don't think it's an essential service and we're pursuing it. And I'm concerned that it really never came back to council or finance committee when we put everything on the table. And that's a $50,000 plus item. So both for process and for, so I question it both on grounds of process and on it being an essential service. So I just wanted to get that into the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gonzalez, on that second point, what, since we are here in a called meeting and you have the council members in the room, what would you suggest or what would you like to see council potentially weigh in on right now? Would it be to retract it, or what would be the thing that we might bring back or direct staff to do differently?
Well, one, I think that things should have come to council in the first place, and that should have been in the pile that went to council. But that aside, it didn't. And now I think that people need to, I suppose, give justification for why that's an essential service, or retract it, which would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. And council members, you have heard Councilmember Gonzalez's request, because this is part of the admin report and not a specific agenda item. Sylvia and I would be looking for you all to provide direction or sponsorship if you want Sylvia to take a direction different than what she's currently doing. Councilmember Rosengarten.
I agree with you on the past discussion about Granicus parallel with OpenGov or YouTube sharing, recording everything. I wanted to mention and have someone do some research. All the audio that I clicked on prior to 10/21/2008 was gone. So I don't know if that means all of our council meetings prior to 10/21/2008 are saved somewhere else when we switched over to Granicus, or what happened. So we don't want that to happen again once we delete one of these platforms and keep the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez. Councilmember Medicus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure I understand that we have now updated all the systems at City Hall so that we don't run into the same issue when we tried to spread out the dais 6 feet apart and we had computers running and we couldn't get sound correct. And so I just want to make sure that we have all those pieces in place before we go back into chambers and try to do social distancing.
Yes, so part of the answer to that, Councilmember Medicus, is that I'm not going to try to do that again. So I'm not going to attempt to do a hybrid. So part of what went haywire that night was that we had Granicus, our in-house hardwired governmental service operating. We also had a go-to meeting operating at the same time. You then also had multiple members participating in the go-to virtual meeting, but they were all in the same room. So you were getting feedback from people trying to participate in a virtual meeting, even though they were all in the same room. So yes, part of how we will solve that when we go back into chambers is we will not be doing dual meetings. We are not going to be doing go-to meetings in combination with what was our old system, which has now been upgraded. So we will go back to what our old normal was, which is we will continue using Open Town Hall to post the meetings and allow for written public comment. But in terms of the digital recording, it will be the camera in the top corner of the room, the speaker system in the room, the hardwired speakers will produce the audio, and council members will not be also manipulating a virtual meeting on their computer. There will be only one meeting, and council members, residents or people who want to participate outside of chamber will be able to log in and listen to the meeting.
Will they be able to make comments that way?
They will be able to make comments through Open Town Hall, but it will be similar to how we've done things all the way up until the pandemic, which is if you want to make comments verbally, you attend the meeting. And if you want to have your comment be a written part of the record, we now have the Open Town Hall system so that your comments are written and automatically a part of the record and automatically shared with the public.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Now, what council could do in the future is create additional process or options, but right now, no, we haven't done that historically, and we certainly don't have a legal obligation to run multiple systems. Do we have any other council members who want to speak to the first portion of the report? And then I'll hand it over to staff if there's anything else any of you want to highlight in the admin reports. And council members, is there anything else or anybody who's in the meeting this evening who wants to speak to anything in any of the admin reports? Current retail status, I haven't received any updates from staff, but if I do, I'll update it. The update that I did see through both national news and also our local news is that Pier 1 Imports will be closing. They haven't announced when they're going to open up the Sunset Valley store, but once they do, it will be for a limited time, similar to what Babies R Us did, where they are winding down as part of their bankruptcy. And so that space will eventually be vacant. And Sylvia or a staff member, if you're present, could one of you remind me, is that an independently owned plot or is it part of the larger shopping center?
The Pier 1 is an independently platted lot.
Okay. And so I would assume at this point, nobody has shared with us whether or not they have a plan for what they're going to put there next.
No, we do not have any submittals as of yet.
Great. Any other comments, questions from participants, staff, or council members? Councilmember Rosengarten.
Just wanted to say that it is definitely a treasure to go out and eat again. We went to Longhorn Steakhouse Wednesday, and it was great. We stayed in the restaurant. They spaced us every other booth, and there were about 6 booths that were occupied, and we got special service, special treat. So just reminding everybody, go out and start shopping and start getting to the restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on admin or staff reports? We are now at item number 4. Council consideration of agenda items for approval and consent. Councilmember Rosengarten.
I move to approve on consent agenda item number 5, the May 5th and May 12th minutes, and agenda item number 6, financial statements with 8 days of COVID-19 results.
We have a motion to approve on consent items number 5 and 6. Do we have a second from Councilmember Reitz?
Yes, I'll second that.
Great. We have a motion and a second to approve on consent items number 5 and 6. I'm now going to lower everybody's hand just to ask the question, are there any council members who would like to either add or remove from that list? If so, please raise your hand so that I can acknowledge you. Anybody who wants to add or remove from approval on consent? Now, if anybody wants to speak to either of those items, would you please raise your hand before I call the vote? And I'm going to call the vote. If everybody would please, in the chat feature, submit your vote so that the city administrator or city secretary can read it back into the record. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. And Sylvia, if you would please read the votes back once you have them.
Councilmember Rosengarten, aye. Councilmember Reitz, aye. Councilmember Medicus, aye. Councilmember Gonzalez, aye. Councilmember Ellett, aye.
Great, thank you. Motion passes unanimously. We did approve on consent. Item number 5, approval of the minutes from May 5th and May 12th, council meeting and work session. And item number 6, approval of the quarterly financial statements for January, February, and March 2020. That brings us now to item number 7, presentation by JDRF. And I assume Mike is in the room. Mike, would you please raise your hand so that I can bump you to the top of the list of names that I have? There you are. Mike, you do have the floor, and it's very nice to hear from you. Long time no hear or see. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can.
Yeah, I just wanted to very quickly, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak in these unique times. I hope everyone is well. It's been certainly unprecedented times and no different for JDRF, but I wanted to come tonight and just share a little bit. It seems like ages ago, last November, but just to say thank you on behalf of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and our Austin chapter for twofold. One, allowing our organization year after year to host our annual walk event in the city of Sunset Valley and in your facilities and through your streets. It's been a pleasure working with you all, and each and every year I feel like it gets better and better, and our participants love being at that location. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank you all for your continued funding through the HOT funds. The organization JDRF is focused on funding research to cure, treat, and prevent type 1 diabetes, and your support is making a major impact. I don't know if you want me to, Sylvia, go through the slides. Can I control them, or do you need to?
You just need to tell me to advance, and I will advance the slide for you.
Yeah, you can go to the next one. There we go. Just to give you guys a frame of reference, last year we estimate, based on registration, how many people are walk-ups. About 5,500 people participated. It was probably our most attended and most successful event that we've had to date, at least in the time that we've been hosting in the city of Sunset Valley. And so, it's the entire event is all about community. It's all about making the kids and those living with T1D feel special. And by allowing us to have the space and allowing us to utilize your city, we truly are able to build a kind of a community feel and introduce JDRF and hope to many that are affected by the disease. I think the next slide is a video. I don't know if we're able to show it really quickly. It's just less than a minute. Yes. It kind of exemplifies last year's event that we put on.
Been living with one for 10 years. 7 years, getting 5 years old. The way that we see all the advancements they've made throughout our lifetime, and I want to continue to support that. Space that you know, it's like someone that is like, you're not the only one that's different. What's really great about the walk is when you look around, there's thousands of people who are at the side of the disease, but on the opposite side of here to support the families who are going through it. It's a great reminder to us, a great reminder on what the walk really means, which is that support that people.
Thank you. I apologize for the audio. I don't know. Normally when you play it, I think it must just be bandwidth issue. You can go to the next slide. But that hopefully gives you a little feel for last year's event. Again, it was truly a special day, and I know the mayor was there, and we very much appreciate it. You know, some of the next just few slides, we really do take, you know, we really push hard to promote the city of Sunset Valley, and you know, as much as we possibly can, and to highlight the city and to say thank you. And so these just as one example of the many posts that we do via social media and have a big reach through those posts. You can go to the next slide. And, you know, and this just highlights signage throughout the event, and just from the stage through having the mayor address the crowd to highlighting it on local signs along the route. Again, trying to do our part as best as we possibly can to highlight the city of Sunset Valley, to make sure people are aware, you know, of your city, and then also draw people in through the event. Next. You know, here's just a few other photos highlighting the event. Next slide. You know, I think really just so you guys, JDRF is an international organization, and the money we raise is having a major impact. I personally have type 1 diabetes. I've had it for almost 25 years. To see the progress of where we are now from where we were just 5 or 10 years ago is unbelievable. And what event walk, and especially here in our community, really brings people in and has an impact that's making a big difference in a lot of people's lives. So we're very appreciative, and we certainly don't take for granted being able to host our event with you all. As we look to next year, you know, certainly already thinking about large gatherings and how that looks for our walk. And, you know, we have the date scheduled for Sunday, November 8th. We're certainly monitoring the situation as we go forward as to how to make it work. If it's allowed, I think we're going to have plan A, B, and C, and several iterations as we move forward. So I'm sure more to come as we move into the fall, get through the summer. But again, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for your support of JDRF. Questions, comments, anything y'all need?
Mike, I have a few questions.
Sure.
And a couple of my questions are going to include details that you mentioned, but that I want to make sure for people who may be new to your event that if they've never attended your event. So I'm going to feed you some questions that will give us helpful information. How many years have you been in Sunset Valley?
It's been, give me a second.
4 or 5, 4?
I think last year was the 5th year. If I remember correctly, I believe it was the 5th year.
And then historically, before coming to Sunset Valley, you were doing your annual walk at the Domain, and then somewhere before it was called the JDRF One Walk, it was also known in Austin as the Schlotzsky's Bun Run, correct?
Right. Yeah, and we used to host it before the Domain. I think it was in in Mueller at one point. And it's moved around over time a little bit.
And then a point that you have made clear many times and that I've heard you, your families at the event, I mean, I know the message has been made clear to me. You all very much appreciate and utilize the, I believe it's $15,000 in hot funds that's given to your one-day event. But you've also made it clear that you really like being in Sunset Valley. And even if it was just the special use permit and the privilege to be in Sunset Valley, to you, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. You do want the hot funds to continue, but you would also still want the event to continue even without the hot funds.
Yeah, that is very much true. I can't, having been there multiple years now, I can say that having the flexibility to build the village, the kids zone, the tent village, all those features really allows us to create an atmosphere that people want to come back. So yes, that is correct. We do appreciate and put to good use the hot funds, but we're also equally grateful for to use the space as well for the event.
And then these next questions, I didn't call you to warn you that I was going to ask these questions. So if you don't know, please just say you don't know. Do you know, I don't know that I've ever thought to ask you this question. Do you know what it costs JDRF total, including donations and money that's provided from things like Sunset Valley sponsorship? Do you know what the actual cost is to produce this event?
If you don't count, I would say our margin for a walk is, and this is not including staff time, this is just hard costs. I mean, every fee imaginable, whether that's credit card donations where we have to pay fees, whether it's the tent, I mean, you name it, every cost. Our margin on a walk is in the expense margins 15%. So about 85% of it is going to the mission. And that does not include operational costs, that's event costs.
So do you have and the reason, so you know where I'm coming from this, sometimes I have heard residents suggest that we put on our own fun run or that we put on our own event. Sometimes it's helpful to hear from an organization like yours where you're putting on a very serious event. How much does it cost for you to put this one-day event on?
Well, I would say about $100,000, but that includes like a lot of the fees associated with raising money. So I think, for instance, all the rentals that we put forth is somewhere in the 25 to 30,000 range or more.
And then how many staff do you have? Because your staff also, in large part, I would say some very large percentage of their salaried full-time contribution goes towards preparing and putting on this event. How many staff?
Right. We have 5. We unfortunately, JDRF during this pandemic had to furlough about half the organization nationwide. So we are currently at 3 staff members. We rely quite heavily on committee and volunteer. I mean, it's truly a staff volunteer partnership. So, but yes, the staff does have a lot of the heavy lifting normally at full strength.
Also, just in the same vein of that, just so residents, if you haven't ever attended this, so this is an example of an event where, unlike many things that we do in Sunset Valley, the volunteers for JDRF, you guys are an exemplary organization, and I know why. It's because it involves children, and so you have parents and family members who are very seriously devoted to this cause. And so your event, I notice it every year that I'm there, the amount of volunteers that you have is just incredible. I mean, I would say you have hundreds of hundreds of volunteers where they each have very specific jobs and duties that they're doing. And then you have all of these teams that come together. The families take this day for them is a very, very big deal in the year of fundraising and progress for JDRF.
Yes. Yeah, it is truly a volunteer-led organization, and we couldn't do it without the volunteers. And so, again, I really want to echo and thank you guys really for the year after year supporting JDRF. It means a lot to the organization.
And with that, you have my full support. I hope we can give you your special use permit and work with you on your plan A, B, C, and D and make it as big and wonderful for the kids, for the volunteers, for the people who come. I hope that we can still have the kids zone. And then in terms of the hot funds, that will of course be up to the Budget and Finance Committee and Council, but I would hope that we can find a way to still offer you some or all of that support, because I'm sure you guys have had huge losses this year, and I believe your annual fundraiser occurred and had to be either canceled or altered significantly, and I got to think that that altered what you guys were able to raise this year.
Yeah, and nationwide, it really did take a toll, and not only on future research, but on research that we commit year after year. Canceling all spring activities across the nation had a massive impact. And so we are currently in virtual fundraising mode and wrapped up a campaign to take place of what our in-person event that was supposed to take place in April.
So I'm going to say thank you for coming tonight and thank you for the presentation. And then I'm going to let council members and any residents who want to speak before Mike leaves this evening. Councilmember Rosengarten, you are self-muted, but you do have the floor.
Mike, I just wanted to say it was each time I've gone, and I've gone to each event, it was very well attended. It was a great event. I always enjoy it. I always wonder why we don't have more residents come out. It's always on a great day also. Every time I go, I also learn a lot more and more about diabetes. And for anybody listening who might know of a child in Sunset Valley who has diabetes, please bring them out and let's get behind that child as our child to sponsor, because we're donating funds to the JDRF, but we have no one within the city who we are helping. It would just feel like we're behind this person more. It's someone we know that lives right in Sunset Valley. So if you know of someone, please bring them out. And there's nothing, I've individually have supported and donated to the JDRF myself. So depending on what happens this year during the budget, we can all individually support. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, we welcome any and all people to come from the city to come out. There's no cost. You know, obviously we are raising money, but to participate, there really is not any fee or registration. Come out, please come out as you can.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments this evening? And I would echo what Councilmember Rosengarten said. If we know of a resident who has an immediate or even, you know, a coworker, if there's anybody who has a one degree or less degree of separation between a child who has type 1 diabetes, we certainly, in all our years, we've never been able to have sort of a in-city representative. And I think that would extend also to the elementary school if we had any children at the Sunset Valley Elementary School that were type 1. And so thank you very much, Mike, for coming, and hopefully we will see you in November for your event and sooner for Money Talks.
Thank you all. Stay well.
Thanks. Council members, we are now moving to our next item of the evening, item number 8, consider an act on the purchase of pole banner design and hardware in an amount not to exceed $25,000 from the Hotel Occupancy Fund. And I will hand it over to staff and also the sponsor and committee that are leading this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Back on May the 6th, the CED committee met to discuss the purchase and design of subsequent banners, of advertising banners. It had been a topic of discussion for a couple of meetings, and then we finally got to the point of reviewing a submission from a local firm, Canales and Company, in a design that was broken into 2 segments that really was discussing the overall advertising needs for the city, not just necessarily the banners into a long term. The committee voted to forward a recommendation to the council for $25,000, and that was $15,000 for the design and fabrication, not to exceed $10,000 for an amount of $25,000, not to exceed $25,000. So after the committee met, several committee members expressed concern over the cost, especially receiving the reports that the city's hotel would not be paying their quarter of hot funds, and questionable as to whether, one, they were going to be able to stay in business, and two, would even be able to pay an additional quarter, and considering the financial circumstances the hotel found itself in. So the committee chair and the council liaison sought additional bids. They came back with 2 other bids. Bid 1 was Vanessa Lively for $1,680, which included 1 design with 3 rounds of revisions. Wahine Creative, which was $1,250, which included 2 to 3 design concepts. And Canales & Company reduced their bid to $7,500 and included 2 unique design concepts. Fabrication was also researched. U Printing, 5866, Adventures, 5865, and Best of Signs, there's a clarification. It is also in the $6,000 range. The sign that was quoted here is a 3 by 6 foot sign as opposed to a 30-inch by 60-inch sign. So there is also an additional cost for rental of a scissor lift, and those price ranges range from $750 a week to $1,000 a week, depending on the type of scissor lift. There are some right-of-way permits that were required by the City of Austin and Austin Energy to utilize the existing poles along Brody Lane, which is where the committee felt most of the advertising needed to take place. So there was a question as to staff being able to hang the banners. And my comment to the committee then and my comment to the council is now is if that's a directive from the council, then the staff will reallocate its resources in a particular week to hang the 50 banners. So we estimated 3.5 days to do that, 50 banners at 45 minutes for each particular banner. So the recommendation at this point is to select Wahine Creative, the low bidder for the advertising of $1,250, and Ads Venture for fabrication, which was the lowest bidder in the amount of $5,865, for a total of $7,115 for the purchase of 50 banners. Today we had a discussion with a shopping center who informed us that the city had previously purchased some banners and they hung the banners, and they are very interested in hanging these type of banners within the shopping centers themselves, within their lighting poles and the fixtures, and are excited to participate with us to get things reopened. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Ellett, who is the sponsor.
Thank you, Sylvia. Nothing much for me to add. I was on that conference call today with Sylvia and Councilmember Medicus. And the idea of banners was extremely well received by the one property operations manager, or leasing manager we talked to today. I think, you know, this idea came about from a resident. It was hashed over in CED, and as Sylvia said, after taking a look at various bids, we come back, which I think is a very cost-effective solution. It puts us on display. It tells the world we are open, and these are permanent banners with, and you know, the cost per impression is very, very low. I would make a motion, opening it up for discussion. I would make a motion that we go along with staff's recommendation. We award Wahine Creative for the design of the banners in the amount of $1,250. And that we award Ads Venture for the fabrication of the banners in the amount of $5,865 for a total of $7,115.
We have a motion. Do we have a second from Councilmember Rosengarten?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And at this point, I would open it up for discussion. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few comments. I obviously am in favor of banners. I have comments on pricing. It seems like the last time that we did banners, that they were something in the $1,400 or $1,700 range for production, and so I'm wondering why it's so much more expensive this time to do the banners. I am thrilled that that Market Fair is again wanting to put up the banners. They've done it in the past. And so I'm grateful that we have that. I am concerned about moving forward with the placement on Brody when when we don't even have that done. So I would like to even potentially kick up the number of banners we have if the other shopping centers are inclined to put it in. I mean, I'm happy to get 75 or whatever number it is that we can put up in all the various shopping centers. I'm just not sure that we have no image of what they're going to look like on the poles. I got some images of what the poles would look like that they might go on Brody, and if we got the agreements, and there's a lot of ifs there from here to there, and I'm not sure that that we will even see them well. There's a lot of tree coverage, so placement is a question to me. I would like us to move forward with the creative part, but I think we should probably get more bids because this seems very high for possibly less than what we could like double this and still be at half the cost. So that's what I'm kind of concerned about in terms of price, and I just because it's so much higher than what we paid before. It would have been nice to have seen the actual more of the production work of some of the other people ahead of time in terms of in the presentation. But if people want to go with that particular one, I think it's a stopgap measure and it's good to move forward. But I would friendly amendment say let's go ahead and do the creative now and get the banners designed and then figure out where they're going to go and how many we need. Because if we got all the shopping centers to buy in and they were going to put them up for us, well, then that would be awesome. And we could order more banners, which would be, I think, the important part. That there was talk about putting them on more on 290 and that there are good polls for it there. So I just think that more could be discovered. I would friendly amendment say, let's go ahead and get the creative going, and then let's figure out how many we can possibly plaster the city with. Thank you. And at what cost?
Councilmember Gonzalez, to be clear, you're asking for an amendment that would have the creative proceed now and the final art and number would come back again to council for a secondary approval?
Well, it's also in the meantime to go back to where we had such a good price before and get a bid because it was significantly less.
If I could.
Yeah, and actually, just because you've asked for an amendment, Councilmember Gonzalez, I've unmuted Councilmember Rosengarten and Councilmember Ellett, the motion maker and the second, and I will allow the three of you to decide what the amendment is and to what extent you do or don't accept it.
I would say the first question I have is, do we have enough polls for 75 banners?
It would depend on how many shopping centers buy in. I think that they were saying something like 40 potential, was it 30 or 40, Sylvia, in Market Fair that was possibly available?
Yes, the shopping centers themselves could easily absorb 50 to 75 banners. And initially we priced 90 banners. And so Councilmember Gonzalez, to your point about fabrication, yes, absolutely. The banner itself, if we were to only purchase 50 banners, it's significantly lower. This includes the hardware, and the hardware, each hardware set runs, I think the median price was almost $90. So the hardware per banner is what adds to the large cost.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Previously, when I was on the CED committee, we ordered the banners for the first time with the ones we have right now. And we thought those would be the ones that brought more folks to the retail area. So I don't remember how many we ordered the last time. Anybody have that number?
I do not.
Okay.
Well, that's why I have my friendly amendment, is that, we could explore this a little bit further and we just move forward with creative and then see what we need to do on the part. That's why I have a friendly amendment.
What would the motion maker and second like to do with the friendly amendment? Accept it, modify it, or reject it?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember
Hello?
Ellett and Rosengarten. Yes, Councilmember Ellett,
Yeah.
Rosengarten, and Gonzalez. You all three are unmuted so that you can work it out.
If I may, let me ask the city administrator some questions. So the production of this, this was bid out as well, right? Obviously.
Yes,
And we bid this out to how many people for the
3.
3? And this was obviously the lowest bid, right? And as Councilmember Rosengarten said, this includes hardware, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And we can always order more banners, correct? As we see the need for them.
Correct. Once the creative is complete.
Then I would respectfully reject the amendment. I think time is of the essence here, as we heard today. And if we need more banners in the future, we can order more banners, and I assume the lead time on those would be reasonable.
Yes, once the creative is done, the banner delivery is really a matter of within a week for fabrication and delivery.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I think it's prudent for us to move ahead. So I would stay with the motion I put forward as is, and as was seconded by Councilmember Rosengarten.
And I agree. It's simply because time is of the essence.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. And so with that, are there any other council members who want to speak? Councilmember Medicus?
Yeah, I was thank you, Mayor. I was encouraged today that in our conversation with the Market Fair representative that they were willing again to hang them themselves. And at this point, I think it is important to get some pizzazz going in the shopping area. And I think the banners actually are really mostly designed to go on the metal poles. So there are enough metal poles in the shopping center, and hopefully the other centers would agree to put them up. We have a meeting with the Village Center tomorrow afternoon. So I would suggest that to expedite all of this, rather than having to get into legal things with Austin Energy and lease agreements and permits and all of that, that we go forward with this and install them in the shopping centers. And that we go with it's a 30 by 60 inch flag. Yeah, because that one estimate was actually for a 3 foot by 6 foot, which was not what we were really looking at. So I think we also should look at this as something that we're doing as a stopgap to get something moving quickly, because if we end up with an RFP and we look at overall design and promotion of the city, we may be looking at design for banners that are more in line with wherever that ends up, but there's too much time that would pass while we waited for that. So I'm in favor of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Meredith, would you recognize me?
I did.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to procedurally say that labor isn't an insignificant cost, and it's just if we could at least, kind of martial law how many we think we're going to get done, so we do the labor together. And that doesn't require an amendment, but that is just procedurally a good thing to do, and I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosengarten.
I was also going to add that the scissor lift, I called Home Depot and they ran them out. A 19-foot scissor lift for 1 week is $675 plus tax. For a daily use is $357 plus tax. Thank you.
Councilmember Reeds.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I am supportive of this, even though we do have that marketing RFP and we may have other designs later. I agree with Councilmember Medicus that I think the time frame will be too long. So I am in favor of pursuing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any additional council members who want to speak? And if not, do we have any residents who want to speak to this issue? Anybody in the audience who wants to speak, the public? And Regine or Sylvia, could one of you please, before I call for the vote, could one of you please read back the motion?
Mayor, Helen Bessie has her hand up.
Thank you. Sorry, Helen, you're at the bottom of the screen and I don't see you unless I scroll. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. I was very pleased to know that we have a local company that was bid on this, and I was also equally pleased that you chose to go with a more economical firm. I'm sorry we couldn't use our local company. I just have one question. Could someone explain to me how this applies to the hot fund tax in terms of funding this? Thank you.
So in the hot fund for Sunset Valley anyway, the tourist equals shopper. So the attraction of folks to our venue, which happens to be our shopping centers, really is a way to attract, and that's the banners advertising, not just Sunset Valley, but attracting into not just the shopping centers, but our entire area. And so that's why the signs will say shop Sunset Valley, eat Sunset Valley, similar type messages.
Oh, thank you.
Councilors, if you would please log your vote in the chat. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. And Sylvia, if you would please read the votes back once you get them.
Okay. Councilmember Reeds, aye. Councilmember Medicus, aye. Councilmember Rosengarten, aye. Councilmember Gonzalez, aye. Councilmember Ellett, aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. We are now moving to item number 9, presentation and possible action on changing the COVID-19 status for projects and programs that were designated as canceled to suspended status. And I will allow Councilmember Reeds and Sylvia to have the floor. I'm not sure which one of you would like to lead the presentation.
I'll leave it to Councilmember Reeds.
So this was just an item that came up during some citizen comments where I believe there was some angst caused when we use the term canceled versus suspended. Canceled has a finality and it does lose its placeholder in the budget. And so my motion would be to change this into change the canceled programs into a suspended state until we can further evaluate as we get more information, more data that comes in on what makes sense for us to do in future years. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Reeds. And before you move any further, just in case anybody missed it, she just made a motion. So we have a motion to approve this, which will then open us to discuss it more if we like. So we have a motion on the floor to move the official status from canceled to suspended for all programs that were affected by the COVID-19 status. Do we have a second, which will open it for discussion? Oh, sorry about that. Councilmember Medicus, do you have a second?
I do, second.
Thank you. We now have a motion and a second. And Councilmember Medicus, while you have the floor, is there anything that you want to add before I open it to additional discussion?
No, this has actually been brought up in several meetings I've been in, and I think it is more appropriate to use the terminology suspended because we are still in a recovery mode or approaching recovery, and we don't really know the data to make an informed decision yet. This is such an unusual situation. So I think suspended fits better. Thank you, Wanda.
Great, thank you. And I agree. Thank you to both of you for this. Councilmember Rosengarten, you have the floor.
I just want to let everybody know, just because it said canceled doesn't mean that line item was going to disappear from the budget. And that's the way some emails have been coming through. They think just because the word canceled was there, that meant that it started from ground zero. And if you wanted it, you had to put it back on the line item. That's not how it happens. It's simply stating that it was canceled for the rest of this year and then would start up October 1. That's it. However, the motion that's on the table, there are some items after going through this that I felt maybe we need further discussion on. Maybe they could be canceled. One of them, for instance, especially for the rest of this year, would be environmental seminars. And there's volunteer awards banquet. We can cancel that until October 1. And let's see, another one, Summer Science Day. It usually happens during the summer. There's a great chance we don't want a bunch of kids meeting and getting together during the summer and us being responsible if somebody did get sick. So we can cancel that until October 1. There's also some of these items I went through, and I feel that if all of the residents of Sunset Valley aren't aware of these services, they should be a fee-based service or they should be canceled totally. I'll give you a couple of examples. Trailer usage. I didn't know there was such a thing. When I need a trailer, I rent from Home Depot, $25. So the city should not be utilizing services and doing up and beyond than what every citizen is aware is available to them also. Another one is residential landscaping consultation. I have utilized Carolyn myself in the past, but I think at these times, Carolyn is going to be very busy, and I think we could charge for that fee or cancel it, that we hire our own landscape consultation, because a lot of times when you hire a landscape consultant, they'll give at least the first hour for free. Next one is soil delivery. Now we know that there's mulch delivery, which I think we should charge for, at least for the delivery part. And it doesn't have to be $75 like Home Depot charges. It could be $25, but something, instead of staff going out of their way doing these deliveries and not getting any additional cost back for it. So soil delivery. I didn't know there was soil delivery available to residents, but evidently somebody knew it. But all of the residents aren't aware of this and aren't getting the same service. So that one needs to be a fee-based or stop it, because that soil, staff bought it for use on city property. Somebody sees it in the mulch bed area, and then they ask if they can get some, and then a poor staff person is not wanting to say no and says yes. That's wrong. That soil was bought and paid for, cost money, and it should be sold if somebody wants some. Another one, residential requests, personal requests to repair or fix something on their personal property. That has to stop. Then there are a couple of them on here listed as canceled, and they're already done. The Star Party is done. The Public Works Open House is done. The Breakfast on Crystal Mountain, we haven't done that one in years. Spring Fling, we could still have a Spring Fling. We all go out and do a grand opening with the retail, and we all pay for our own dinner. We could do that as soon as June happens and more of the restrictions are less and less. Creek cleanup, we can do that again by volunteers. I've done that many times. And sewing community, I think that needs to be canceled. Why? That is the most vulnerable group. It's no different than when H-E-B or Walmart or any other entity says, I will open up early between 8 and 9 and have all the 60 and above come and do their shopping. Now you've got all the vulnerable group together in one spot. And that to me is an issue. So we need to cancel that until at least another year down the road, until we get more information as to what's going on with this COVID-19. On the volunteer awards banquet, I think there if you give every volunteer a gift card from a restaurant in Sunset Valley and let them go out and spend it in the restaurants, rather than one restaurant getting the benefit, just a variety of different restaurants. And the green program, I forgot what that is, so I have a question mark on that. That's $5,000. Anybody help me on that? Is Carolyn around? Nope.
I'm here. The Green Business Program was a program from this Planning and Environmental Committee. It was to start kind of just rewarding businesses kind of for what they were doing and encouraging environmental conscious activities within the commercial area.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about that. Okay. All right. So again, the word canceled did not mean it was wiped off of the budget. It was simply not going to be done between now and October 1. That's all. I went through my list, and mulch delivery, I believe there should be a fee for that. Art Fest, if things start turning around, we could have a fall Art Fest. So suspended, fine. Going through my list yet. And liaison for solid waste services. There's nothing in the dollar amount. Is there a reason? It's on page 3 of 3, and it says liaison for solid waste. Is it 3 of 3? Yep. There's no dollar amount underneath the dollar amount. Do you have any idea what that is?
You need to go and put it again.
That'd be TDS, you would think. No? These are for solid waste services.
And look, Carolyn or Sylvia, do either of you have anything you can add or help Councilmember Rosengarten with that?
So
This
that's
is
just the,
Sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
the liaison for solid waste services would just be staff time working with TDS, handling when residents issues and just coordinating with TDS on that.
So staff working with TDS.
Yes,
So,
and it's active.
okay, litter pickup and corridor cleanup. Aren't they pretty well the same thing? I see one's only $150 and the other is $9,000. Both of them are dealing with.
Yeah, $9,000. I think that was really actually the $9,000 that's in Parks and Grounds, which is a lot more than actual just litter pickup. Corridor cleanup would be something that the police department does.
Okay. Got it. That's what I have. Thank you.
So Mayor, I have a resident comment from Sasha Russell.
Okay, hold on. Let's get through council members first. Councilmember Reeds.
So thank you, Councilmember Rosengarten. I think those were some valuable insights on some of those programs. I think maybe a suggestion on how to go about this, because there are a lot of programs to review. And what I would like to see is if staff would step up and put together a chart a little more complete that includes things like how many people have used this service. For example, how many people use AntBait, how many people use this, and also make some suggestions on, there are some programs that pay for themselves for like AntBait, et cetera. And so a chart that would have everything out, all of participation, some type of participation level, and also some update on things that we have already done, and just get those off the list, and come back and maybe post it and see what the residents, let's get some resident input on what they want to see coming back. So.
We can definitely post it in open town hall as a poll and let folks comment and weigh. We are doing a similar exercise within planning and environmental as we look through the programs, really starting from what's absolutely necessary in terms of base, and then thinking about, as they want to add programs, what does that program cost? Not just from a personnel standpoint, but from a material and equipment kind of cost. And then, I was explaining to them, it's sort of building a sandwich or a burger, right? Every additional topping that you have has some sort of cost. And so before we get too out of whack as to, everything we want, let's first figure out what we need. And then let's figure out what are those things that are maybe right next to need, but a little bit more than nice to have, and then go on from there, because the fund has to still be, the venue fund anyway, still has to be sustainable. So as we add, right, there's no emergency reserve within that fund itself. So when we take a hit like we did with COVID, whatever we put in there will either be cut immediately when something bad happens, or we need to have a little bit of a slush to be able to handle it over a period of time. So we're already working on that exercise with P&E. They just gave us that direction. I think it was last night. I don't know what day it is anymore. So I'm happy to bring that back to the council, but can also put a poll out if that's what the council would like to see.
I would like that, and I would also like to see if there are some programs that residents could put on, for example, like a star party or something like that. If that's something that's of importance, could this be a citizen-run program versus always the staff time? Because that is a limiting factor.
Okay.
Councilmember Reitz and also for other council members, Councilmember Rosengarten made quite a few suggestions. I don't think she formally requested that any or all of those be accepted, but I would be looking to other council members in the motion maker and second to acknowledge if they want to incorporate any of those comments into the action. And the additional commentary that would be, if we were going to do a poll, I believe it was Aneshka Carmona that mentioned this in the meeting last night, which is what would be helpful as we're discussing these lists within committees, council meetings, and certainly if we did a poll, I think it would be helpful to all residents if they could see all be receiving the same data set. So even if, say, a committee is only looking at things that are considered P&E programs, there's some of those where the line between a public works program and a P&E program, it blurs, and certainly to the average resident, they may not know the difference. And it can make a difference in how we rank and prioritize things if we're all in a silo ranking and prioritizing different sets of data. It makes it very hard for council to then put those sets together and mesh how they're supposed to prioritize them as a whole for an upcoming budget. Councilmember Medicus.
Thank you, Mayor. As Sylvia mentioned, we did, it was last night actually, that P&E met, and P&E had actually ranked a lot of the services. So we do have a ranking similar to the format that Public Works did. So in our meeting last night, we did discuss dovetailing that. We also discussed what could be done by residents. For example, the pass-through, which is the adopt a tree and the fire ant bait, could potentially be handled by residents, volunteers, or P&E committee volunteers. So there was a lot of that discussion, and some of the items that Councilmember Rosengarten brought up about charging for mulch delivery and things of that nature were also discussed. So I would like us to, I think it's a little too early to put a poll out without all of the connecting the dots and being clear about what we're asking people to rank, or have, so we have some background, people understand what they're looking at. And I would like to give P&E the chance to complete that layering of phasing back in some of these programs or not, or changing them. So I think there will be a recommendation coming forward from P&E relatively soon. For now, I think I'd like to just see us, let's just say they're suspended. Some of them are complete. Some of them we're probably are going to change or eliminate, but right now we're not there.
Thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Medicus and Councilmember Reitz that we should keep it in suspended status. But I really hope that as we move forward in mid-June, that we have a much more accurate projection of what our finances is and what we've been working with, and then I think that's when we reassess, because that unless we hit a double dip, which we may have happen. But unless we hit a double dip, we're going to get our most significant numbers very soon. You know, we're going to know what the probable bottom looks like, and then I think we'll have a better chance of estimating the rest of the year. I mean, another double dip could hit us, no question, especially as we're opening up and having these ascending numbers. But I still think that would be a good time for us to reassess what we might be putting back in. And certainly what staff we might be putting back in. So those are all things that I think that we need to examine very deeply in the middle of June, after we have hopefully, and I'm asking now for staff to give us a much more realistic assessment of what we think the numbers are going to be for the rest of the year after that June number comes in. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I recognize Councilmember Ellett, what I'm also seeing is I'm now sitting in on all of the committee. Sylvia, I think this would be a great time for us as a city to be much more accurate and clear when we talk about staff time contribution to stuff. So even, for example, that TDS item that Councilmember Rosengarten just pointed out, or when we look at the utility fund, or we look at these various funds where we have a portion of staff salary being paid. I don't argue that that's appropriate, but I don't know that there's even staff members that can clearly explain to a resident when they ask, how did you derive this calculation and is it accurate? Councilmember Ellett.
Thank you. A couple of questions, a couple of comments first. Thank you, Councilmember Rosengarten, for shedding light on some of those items. And thank you, Councilmember Reitz, for wanting to clarify it in the parameters of each one of those in better detail. The question I have is, if something moves off the canceled into the suspended column, what is the process then or approval needed to expend money against that?
Well, on June the 2nd, we are going to bring a budget amendment that has all of, whether it's canceled, suspended, et cetera, those are all going to be quote unquote zeroed out because they're part of the numbers that we've brought back to the council. So you'll have a new base budget that has zeros in some line items. Anytime there is an expenditure that needs to be made among those line items, it does require council approval.
And so whether we move it from canceled to suspended would not change that budgeting process, correct?
No, I think there was just some concern over the finality of whether it was canceled or suspended and where that is in the budget process. What we've said as staff in the budget process is we're going to bring forward a complete budget. We're not going to delete any line items or anything like that. We're going to bring forward a budget so that the committees and the council have the ability to see what was there, what got zeroed out, and what can potentially be filled back in. So there won't be any lines deleted if a program or service is suspended or canceled. It does still require council action to re-amend that budget or make any changes for expenditures within that budget.
So just to hammer it home into my head, so whether we put it in suspended or canceled does not change that, is what you're saying, how it gets. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And if it needs to be clarified, Councilmember Ellett, the other way you could make that clear is to just say, amend the motion to be clear, moving items that are canceled into a status of suspended, and add the caveat that any money spent on those, whether included in the base budget or not, that any suspended programs require council approval during this fiscal year if money is going to be expended against them.
I would put that to the motion maker if they, in the second, if they would accept that.
And Wanda, you were the motion maker. Would you accept that amendment?
That's fine.
And who, I don't recall, who was the
I believe
second?
it was Karen, Councilmember Medicus.
Councilmember Medicus, would you accept that clarification?
Yes.
And so Councilmember Ellett, that then makes it clear if residents or committees, and also for staff, so that staff also understands as you're acting as the in-house sort of advocate for these programs on your various committees, that you make sure that you can't plan or spend money without first getting approval from council, or maybe getting a recommendation from the committee first, which then comes to council to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, if there aren't any additional council comments, we'll move to resident comments. And Helen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I like the wording that the mayor gave for the council action proposal. But would you repeat that, as I asked at a couple of meetings before? Would you repeat it before you actually vote on it?
Yes, I'm trying to remember. I do remember you asking for that, and I have been trying to remember to do that. So yes, I will have either Sylvia or Regine read it back before I call for the vote.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate Rudy's detail and looking at these budgets and the suspended and what in the world are these? That even happened to us in P&E. We have all these line items in the P&E quote budget, and it's like we didn't know what they were. That the soil, but that was explained to us that was not soil that was purchased. That it was soil from something where the city excavated some land, and that was just dirt that they needed to get rid of. Not that we'd actually purchased dirt and we were giving it away. But I like her comments about charging us for the mulch delivery. And I very much liked our ranking that we did, which most of you probably haven't seen, but it really clarified our values in terms of the value to the city or to the residents. And there was a column, a box next to each ranking, so that you could actually put a comment in there, which I think also is very helpful. And I hope that if you do a poll, tell the residents that that's clear. Also that all the committee members who are doing this, as well as the residents, know exactly what they're voting on or polling on, because for us, again, it was not clear what in the world is this program. And to just put that out to the public, you may get a skewed result. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sylvia, in the OpenGov budget tool, will that now be something that's much easier for residents? I know it may not be there now, but for example, when we approve the next budget, will it be very easy for a resident on an item like the example Helen just gave, for a resident to go, oh, what is soil delivery? Will they be able to click on something that gives them a clear description on every dollar that we budget?
There's a descriptor, yes.
Catherine Johnson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Council and Mayor. This is a comment that kind of ties into this, so I'll try to keep it brief. I just keep hearing the need for potentially some organization of volunteers. I think a couple of the items that we discussed in the P&E meeting or the work session yesterday, like the adopt a tree, the ant bait, and then at a past meeting, discussion about volunteers at the elementary school. I didn't know if it was possible to discuss forming another committee that would be purely to coordinate volunteer efforts. And as we're going through items on our budgets that could potentially get moved to a volunteer effort, if that would be something helpful to have in place before the next year's budget is put in, thinking about things like, creek cleanup and some of those other items.
So if we were going to form another committee, council would have to go through the process of defining the committee, and absolutely they could do that. So the procedure for that would be for a council member to sponsor it. And then it would be, if adopted, it would be included in our city structure, similar to our current standing committees. I think that is one path. Another path would be for each existing committee to agree that they would put on at least one, which I think is what I proposed a few weeks ago. It would be nice if each committee had one thing that their already active membership could say, our committee is going to agree to do. For example, in the Public Safety Committee, they could say, we're going to agree to do one cleanup activity per month, and we're going to spearhead a revived neighborhood captain program in combination with the committee and the police chief, but that we will volunteer to be those neighborhood block captains if needed. So it could be either way. If you go the route I went, it doesn't require council to do anything, legislate, create, agree. The committees could just spearhead it themselves. But to create an additional standing committee would require council action.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I just wasn't sure what the process was. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose some of these things. The item about helping residents who might need to, say, repair a mailbox. I understand that our city staff should not be burdened with that from a time standpoint, but it would be nice from a sense of community if we still had a way to assist residents who have those needs and can link them up with a person who can help them outside of staff time.
I agree. And I think either one of those options, even both those options, even if you had the standing committee, if they were in charge of coordinating the committee's volunteer efforts in addition to other efforts, I think that is a great suggestion. It would take at least one council member wanting to lead the sponsorship and discussion and approval of it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other resident input? And I believe, Sylvia, you said you had a comment from Sasha Russell.
She's withdrawn her comment.
Do we have any additional comments from the public or from council members? And Regine or Sylvia, would one of you please read back the motion before I call for the vote?
The motion is to move programs previously listed as canceled to suspended, and to bring back any required or requested expenditures from those programs back to committee and or council for approval.
All those in favor, please submit your vote via chat. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Sylvia, if you would please read the vote back.
Councilmember Gonzalez, aye. Councilmember Ellett, aye. Councilmember Reitz, aye. Councilmember Medicus, aye. Councilmember Rosengarten, aye.
Council members, we are now at item number 10. I'm going to proceed unless a council member raises their hand to request that we take a break. Councilmember Gonzalez. And it looks like I see your hand up, but I don't see any audio option for you. Oh, never mind. I see that I have you in two separate places. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Break sounds lovely.
Break. Okay. We will, we've had a councilmember request a break, so we will take a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 8:23. Sylvia, are you and Regine back on?
Yes.
And do we have a quorum of council members?
1, 2. Yes.
It is 8:23, calling back to session regular city council meeting for the city of Sunset Valley, Texas for Tuesday, May 19th, 2020. We are now, we have 2 items left this evening. Next item is item number 10, presentation on the utility fund. And this is being co-sponsored by Councilmember Reitz and Councilmember Ellett, and I will let Sylvia lead the start of this presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is sponsored by Councilmember Reitz and Councilmember Ellett. Staff did provide information in terms of the facts and figures, so I'll let Councilmember Reitz take it unless she'd like for me to continue. Councilmember Reitz?
Yes, I'd be happy to take that over. And yes, thank you for all your help in giving the information for this presentation. I did put the presentation together. I did see a comment on OpenGov that there were editorials in here. And if there were editorials, they are my editorials as a council member, and they are not staff editorials. Just want to make that clear. So I wanted to give a presentation on the utility fund because I think there are some misconceptions about it, about the subsidies. We talk about subsidies all the time, but I wanted to make sure people understood what went into all of the subsidies. And so this presentation is more of an educational presentation. It's not meant for any action. It is just a presentational information session. So the first part is what makes up the utility fund. There are 3 separate funds that make up our 3 separate components of the utility fund. And that's water, wastewater, and solid waste. And as you can see, the water is the majority, with then wastewater, and then a small part of solid waste. So we'll go on to the next slide. So the next slide this is the water fund. So we budget, in this past budget for this year, we budgeted $675,000 as revenues, with expenditures of $856,000, which meant we had a deficit of $181,000. And so that is part of, when we talk about that subsidy of $452,000, that is part of that subsidy. So, but let's look at what that is. So you can, on the top there, you see this is basically pulled from the budget book. You have the revenues, and then you have expenditures with our contract payments of $578, professional fees of $7, various operational expenses. Also included in our operational expenses is a subsidy, which is the water conservation program. And that is a program that if you use under 3,000 gallons, you are not required to pay the base fee of $9.14. So that is basically, if you are a low water user under 3,000 gallons, you are basically subsidized $9.14. Now, included in each of these funds are salaries and benefits. The majority of the salaries and benefits are from the public works. Now, part of this is the budget assumptions. These were put together, I'm going to guess, years ago. Someone basically said, this person spends 30% of their time doing water. This person spends 20% of their time. And so what it ended up being was a calculation of their salaries and their corresponding benefits. So, when I looked at it in greater detail, what I found was what this tells us at the $185,000 of salaries and benefits, what that showed was that we were spending 22 man hours a day in working on our water system, which I don't believe is accurate. So this is something that needs to be reviewed, and there have been changes in Public Works also. So all of that needs to be incorporated into that. So that will be, this number will change. So, but that basically comes as basically we are under 181,000. So now we can go to the next slide, which is our wastewater. So this is very much the same thing. You can see our revenues of 497, expenditures of 632, and our deficit of 134,000. And again, this 134,000 makes up part of that 452,000. That is the subsidy that comes from the general fund into the utility fund. This is pretty straightforward. Now, in looking at these salaries and benefits in my conversations with our city administrator, this may be low. I think we need to look at this and based upon the work that is done in this area. So this is something that needs some evaluation. So, all right, if we go down to the next area, is solid waste. So, as you can see, our revenues are pretty tiny, $4,400 really. We have expenditures of $141,000. Now, if you look at what are those expenditures, so part of that is the utility contract of $73,000. If you see that, that is actually our actual cost for residents. This is not part of commercial. This is just residential. So as you can see, we pay $1.84, I believe, a month for our solid waste collection, but it really costs all the city $73,000 a year. So as you can see, this is a little bit. If there's one fund that's a really that shows a very big deficit, this is what I would say would be it. There are other things that are involved in that, which are animal control, has disposal, rental, and tire recycling. So we do have some salaries and benefits in there. That's not a huge number. That will probably change a little bit, but maybe not significantly. So if you go to the next page, you see basically I added up all of these subsidies, and we are basically the general fund subsidizes the utility fund by $452,000 based upon all of these budget assumptions and based upon all the expenses. So the other point I want to make is that once we budget it, and let's say we came in and we really only needed $400,000 of subsidies, we would still move over, because it's in the budget, we would still transfer over the total amount of $452,000. So even if we spent less, even if we had less expenses, that whole entire $452 would still be transferred over. Now, this year, the Budget and Finance Committee, with the different cuts, voted to eliminate this transfer. So, all right, let's go to the next slide. These are actual rates, the next slide. I'll let you kind of study that. I can go through each of those, but I do want to point out garbage and recycling is basically $184 a month. So that's less than, what is that, $2, less than $24 a year. And if I did some quick math, it cost about between $22 and $25 a month of what our actual costs are. Now, the point that is important to make here, if we look at the residential water, is we have the monthly base fee, and that's the $9.14. And again, if you do under 3,000 gallons, you don't have to pay, our residents do not pay the $9.14. That would be a subsidy. If you use between under 10,000 gallons, you basically pay $3.31 per 1,000 gallons. And then there's a second tier of 10,000 to 19,999, and that's at $5.60. And then we have a third tier. Some cities have a lot of tiers, like 5 tiers, 7 tiers. Mr. Carmona sent us some documents that showed different tiers that different cities did. So that is something that can always be looked at. In our residential wastewater, again, we have tiers, and if you understand how this is calculated, it's basically they look at your water use over the winter average, and they use that to calculate what your rate will be, and that's what your rate will be throughout the entire year. And this is the schedule is from 0 to 999 gallons is or the monthly base fee is $4. And if you, during those 3 winter averaging months, use below 10,000 gallons, that's your monthly fee is just going to be $4. If you used over 10,000 gallons, for every 1,000 gallons, you would pay $5.71. So this was a change that was done about 2016, 17, if I'm correct on that. So. And then we've talked about garbage and recycling. So if we go to the next one. So what I've heard a lot since I've become a council member and being on the budget and finance committee is there are lots of perceptions about who gets these subsidies. Is this are subsidies, are some people getting more subsidies than other people? And in fact, I heard it in the budget meeting a couple of weeks ago when they talked about eliminating the subsidies. It's like, let's let the high water users, they need to pay their fair share. So I wanted to go through this and look at what are the real subsidies. So I think if you can go up a slide, Sylvia. There we go. Okay. So basically, if you look at our water system, if you do not pay, if you're under 3,000 gallons, and you do not have a monthly base fee of the $9.14. So that would qualify that as a subsidy because you're basically getting that for free. If you use between 0 and right under 10,000 gallons, you are paying for water at a cost that is lower than cost. So you are paying like $3.31, yes, per 1,000 gallons, and our cost is closer to five something, yes, $5.60, I believe. So if you use water between 10,000 and under 20,000, you're basically paying at cost. And if you use anything above, you pay above cost. At that point, you are paying $9.92. That same philosophy goes through with the residential wastewater. So you have a monthly base fee of $4. And if you are under 10,000 gallons, you do not pay anything extra. And if you're over 10,000 gallons, you pay $5.71, which is our cost per 1,000 gallons. Solid waste, we all pay $184 a month, unless you have an extra card. So, and yes, those are below cost. Every one of those are below cost. So, questions, perceptions. So, and these may be the editorials people were alluding to, but one of the perceptions I've heard a lot, it says households with large manicured lawns are the most subsidized because they use more water. In actuality, they are not. They pay cost or above cost for water and wastewater usage over 10,000 gallons. So I've also heard households who water lawns all year long should pay more in wastewater. These are the households, and there's about 20 of them, who use above the 10,000 gallons in the winter averaging months. And they pay, at that point, they are paying $5.71 for the rest of the year for any gallons above 10,000 gallons. This third one is, we have more millionaires in this city. Why do we need subsidies? Someone told me that was somewhere on OpenGov, and frankly, I have no idea how many millionaires we have, but I would guess that we have just as many people on fixed incomes. This last question I thought was a really interesting question, and it was a kind of intriguing. It's, can we do a type of dividend program instead of reduced rates, i.e. give money back to residents if we have a budget surplus? So how that would work is you pay at the cost, and then if we find we have a lot more sales tax dollars and we have a budget surplus, then we could provide some type of dividend back to each of the residents. But we did research that with TML, and they said that that is not a legal thing to do. Now, if we had a property tax, what could happen is that they would, if you had a budget surplus, you could just reduce the property tax. But since we do not have a property tax, we would be basically be giving out sales tax money to residents, and we can't do that. So even though that was a really intriguing idea, it is not something that we can do. Changes. So in most cities, the utility fund is an enterprise fund, i.e. it makes money for the city. It pays for other programs. That is not the case in our city. Big question that we have had, this has been going around, do we need a cost of service study? So I'm not here to answer that question or argue it one way or another, but if we want to do a cost of service study that actually takes a lot of upfront work, where we need to really figure out what our objectives would be, we need to look at all our budget assumptions. You know, as I showed in the budget earlier in the presentation, all of those salaries and benefits need to be reviewed. All of those assumptions need to be reviewed. So we need to look at everything and really what we want to do. And in looking at the cost of service study that was done, 4 or 5 years ago, there were some things that they didn't ask the study to do, and they found that, wow, that would have been great if we had had that. So I think we want to make sure if we do it right. So can we do things without a cost of service study? Yes, we can, if we need to. And again, I'm not arguing for or against these ideas. I'm putting out possibilities. One is to eliminate the water conservation program. And that's the program that if you use under 3,000 gallons, you do not pay that monthly base fee. Now, that was developed, I'm sure, at some point because of a value system that, we value our resources. So if we were to look at that, I think it deserves some thoughtful sensitive value discussion as we look at that. We could increase the solid waste rate. That would be evenly distributed throughout the city. It would be an equal increase. And we could change wastewater volume charge to begin at 5,000 gallons. Now that would affect households with larger families because that's a lot harder for them to achieve. Mr. Carmona also suggested we could add more tiers into our water costing system. So the next step is we need to continue to evaluate the data as it comes in. Let's see how we look in this COVID crisis, and then I think we need some resident input. So, questions?
Councilmember Rosengarten.
Thank you. Wanda, that was a great presentation. Some of the things you targeted on, we have never targeted on before. For instance, the one question that I really enjoy, or the statement that you mentioned, is can we do something, any changes without a cost of service study? I like that. Never ever was that brought up before, and I really appreciate that. Hit on some of the things we've been talking about. If you look at the three different utilities, the water, you look at the expense over the revenue. The expense over revenues on water is 127%. The expense of wastewater, expense over revenue is 127% on wastewater also. If you look at the expense over revenues of solid waste, it's 3,205%. That's where we should be focusing right now, is solid waste. So we should, because, and I would focus there to do a rate increase on solid waste. And my recommendation would be to even go as much as $15 a month. It's something that you can budget, and it's the same every month. When you go to a rate increase on water, right now people are all using more water. They're having to wash their hands more frequently, wash their clothes more frequently, wipe down surfaces more frequently. So their water rates are going up. You have a household of 5 in the house. I feel for them. They can't stay under 3,000 gallons. So of course they're going to pay more water bill. So that's where I would focus first, is on the solid waste. Then after that, I would focus on the conservation program. I feel it's an unfair program. It rewards those who already are using only 3,000 gallons. That's 1 in the household or 2 in the household. Most times during the wintertime, that's my family. That's my neighbors who are retired. That's another family. But the ones with kids in the home, they can't stay under 3,000 even when it's wintertime. So they can never feel the prize of getting under 3,000 because it's just not going to happen. They want their kids to wash their hands on a frequent basis, etc. So that, to me, I have thought for years needed to be looked at again. So that $9.14, I think we should put that back in. That's my opinion. And doing a cost of rate study, I feel like that's a waste of money. The reason I feel that way is we already know that our rates are so ridiculously low compared to what the cost is. Most times a cost of service study is done to justify a higher rate when the utility already receives a positive revenue or a break even. We're below that. So why spend $20,000 and then go and do a rate increase that might gain us $10,000? To me, we just wasted $20,000 that could have paid that $10,000. So let's not do a cost of rate study. Let's do an increase. And if we want to, do what we did once before. Put a $5 fee on something, but we promise on the dais it's not going away. Once we get the amount of money we need for the cost of service study, it stays. Previously, we promised it was going to go away, but we didn't make it go away. And that really bothered me. But we know where we're at. $15 on solid waste would be $3.75 a week to have your trash and either your mulch or your branches taken away or your recycling. $3.75 a week. Thank you.
Councilmember Ellett.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosengarten made some very good points there. And first of all, let me thank Councilmember Reitz for the work that she put into this. There is a lot we can do right now with the data we have before we need to go to a cost of service study. There's some basic data here that we can look at, we can dissect, and we can analyze in a greater detail. So I agree with Councilmember Rosengarten. We don't need to spend money on a cost of rate study right now when we have some data in front of us right now that we can use. I caution to go to $15 on solid waste. For one of my properties, I just signed up in the city of Austin for solid waste. And I think the rate they're charging me, I should remember from the last one I signed up for, but it's less than $11 a month. And that's for a 67-gallon trash pickup with also a recycling one as well. So, so I just throw that out there. That $15 seems high, although it's not that much money, but it's higher than what the city of Austin is charging me on one of the properties right now. So I think there's a lot of data here. I think we can look at this data, we can analyze it, we can dissect it further, and I don't think we need to go to spend $20,000 right now to a cost of service study when we have this data right in front of us that is homegrown, and with our staff, we can dissect it and analyze it in much greater detail and see where we need to go from there. And obviously, the critical thing is to get residential input along the way. I am glad that we did research on the resident dividend program, because that was one that was raised to me by a resident as a very positive suggestion of how we could handle this. I'm sorry to say we can't do it, but I think that was well researched by, and I think, Sylvia, you talked to more than one attorney at TML, if I'm not mistaken. And it's unfortunate, but, you know, and we certainly don't need a property tax. And as long as I'm a council member, I can tell you I will never vote for a property tax. So that's not something we need to consider. And it's unfortunate we can't do that. It would have been a nice thing to have done. But thank you for the comments. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Wanda, for starting this discussion. I would come to different conclusions than some of the other speakers, and I plan to present a different perspective on this. Sylvia, if you wouldn't mind going to the beginning of the presentation, I think it's like slide 3. I'm just going to sort of right there, what makes up the utility fund. One of the things on your pie chart, one of the things about the pie chart that is worth noting is that 25% of that is what's being subsidized mostly. I mean, there's some of the commercial, but when we had the cost of studies service at that time, they thought we were more or less okay. So that would be kind of a little bit more useful to see when we broke it out between what was residential and what was commercial. And so you would see that 25 was residential and 75 was commercial. Slide down and pass that for me. To the next slide, please. Thank you. I think that it's worth talking about that a lot of the places that we previously talked about in terms of public works was that they often have MUDs associated with them. And so when people are comparing public works employees and city to city, they don't often take into account the MUDs that are providing the water to those cities. And I've had that conflated in previous discussions. And I think it's really important to call out, and all the things that have to be done in terms of personnel. And I don't think that always gets built in to our discussion. So I just think in terms of broadening that, that's a worthwhile thing to start adding in to making it a more apples to apples comparison when we talk about public works and MUDs together in that. So I think that's just, and what personnel, rather than personnel costs, more all the jobs that need to be done. And I don't know that we always get that in our discussion. And so this is, just a broadening of, it's always easy to edit. So I appreciate certainly Councilmember Reetz's work doing this. And I'm just putting in some editorial and in a different perspective because I've been on this issue for a while. Next slide, please. Could you go down to the next one? Thank you. So in terms of wastewater, we don't always, as you said, I think a lot of the information about salaries could be a little bit different in that. I think that we don't pay hardly anything towards wastewater compared to water. And I think that analysis also could be broadened. So I'll probably do a little bit different presentation about this in a week or two, a couple of weeks. And I just wanted to sort of foreshadow that I think that there's some broadening in that discussion about wastewater, that's we pay more towards water than we do towards wastewater. And I think that's worth sort of discussing. And then the next slide. I totally agree with the conversation on solid waste. I think that Rudy made some good points. I don't know what the numbers that we ought to do, but I think certainly that's a place that we could expand. And next slide. So again, let's go down one more. Go past that. I don't want to really. In terms of our rates, I think that I really would like to append Alfonso's work as a council member statement. I'd like to put the second wastewater costs from different cities that he did in there and the rates. I think that'd be really helpful for everybody to see. I will certainly add it to my presentation. But I think people really need to see that, because when you look at some of the slides that you have further down and you start to run the numbers of people, I think it is very important that we have a at least flat utility. You know, I've been lobbying that for many, many years, that at least if we don't make money, we ought to at least be flat. And that's a lot of difference from where we are. And we've been looking at doing that a little bit more incrementally over the years. But I think that's what we should have, a solvent utility. That it shouldn't be, if you're trying to run a business, and you shouldn't have the thing that's the hugest hole just sucking out all the money. And so I think that that's a really important thing to see, is what would we look like if we were solvent, and then choose to back off and subsidize what we want to. That to me is an intelligent way to have a subsidy, is saying, if we were solvent and our utility was at least flat, this is what it would cost us. And to me, as a council that looks at public money, we should at least have that information. And that's why I think a cost of service study is so important. And then we know what we're spending. We don't really know that yet. And things like this conflation of the commercial and the residential together really further skew that. And we need to be able to do that, because as a utility, we need to defend that to our commercial customers. So I think it's critical as a responsible action that we actually have this cost of service study. For instance, if you were to take the City of Austin numbers and you were to roll out the high-end users, your average person in the lower end would only be paying twice. So you're basically subsidizing $25 out of 50. But when you're looking at a higher end user in the 20,000 and above range, you're talking something that's 4 times. So you're looking at something where maybe they're paying $100, and normally they'd be paying $400 if you were using the rates that the City of Austin was using. So that's where people start saying that's a really large subsidy. That's where people get those numbers, is when they run the City of Austin numbers and say, well, this is what a comparable utility would look like. So that's the kind of discussion that a cost of service study would allow us to have. They'd say, and you're right, we really need to think about what those assumptions are that we went underneath it. But that's where you start seeing a really big difference. And so if you append Alfonso's excellent work, you would see those kinds of differences in the rates between the lower end and the higher end users. And if you want to scroll down, let me just, so I would go down the next slide, please, Sylvia. Thank you. And then a little, yeah. So that's why I think some people would say that it's more opinion, right? Depending on what perspective. I'm not doubting that you can say what you're saying from a certain perspective, but if you come from that other perspective, then you can say that yes, if we had a cost of service study, if we had utility structure similar to, say, Austin's, then some people are literally getting a $300 a month subsidy versus a $25 a month subsidy that the majority of people are getting. And that's where people will come up with those kinds of numbers. Anyway, so that's just worth thinking about. I will put some of this stuff out in a chart, and I would guess, as my council member privilege to append something, I would like to append Alfonso's excellent wastewater costs from different cities, because I don't know how he would get to show that to everyone that went to us, because he's already used his OpenGov, and you only get one OpenGov. So I would like to, for myself, post his excellent work on the wastewater costs from different cities. Thank you all very much.
Councilmember Reitz, you had your hand up. Did you want to add something?
So I think that's an interesting take that Councilmember Gonzalez, and I think I understand your point. My point is looking at our cost. I'm not looking at comparing us to any other city at this point. I'm just saying I would like to know what it actually cost the city. And based on the information that we have, then I stand by what I think the subsidies are. Now, the problem with a cost of service study that I saw when I reviewed the cost of service study is that all of those salaries and benefits, the cost of service people said, what's your salaries? And we gave them that information. We did not do any type of study, I don't believe, on actually how many hours were actually for real. So those were numbers that were built into this cost of service study that I think were an incorrect budget assumption. So what I'm cautioning is if we do a cost of service study, I think we need to get our ducks in a row, make sure we have all our proper information that we can give to them to make sure that it is accurate. I would hate to spend $20,000 on something that we gave them garbage going in. So we need to make sure the numbers and the information we give is accurate. And so the first step we need to do, no matter what, even if we do a study or not, is to get better numbers, because we've had changes in our public works department, and we need to do that. So the other thing I would want to bring in also, there's another interesting, there's a number of issues. And again, these do not need a cost of service study. And one is Mr. Carmona put out usage by different categories, like residents use 25% of the water, of total water used. The businesses used like 45, maybe 50%. City Hall used some, the apartments used some, etc. In that was also almost 10 million gallons that were unaccounted for. It's like, maybe we should probably try to figure out some of that problem too, before we spend more money trying to justify or whatever we want to do with this cost of service study. We need to find out where that water waste is going, or how is it unaccounted for? Who is using that water? So whether it's leaks, whether it's meters that are not being read, whether it's inaccurate meters, you know, we have meters out there that we have purchased. I'm not sure they've all been installed yet. And so we've got a lot of work to do. And I would suggest that we continue on this path, that we get our work in and do our evaluations, because we're going to need to do this anyway if we do a cost of service study. Do our good personnel evaluation, understand where those almost 10 million gallons disappear to, and then look at what we can do. And I do agree with the solid waste. If we needed to do something that is a easy way, easy place to start, it does cost on average about $22 per month per person. So I think 15, if as a ball, you know, that's thrown out there, that's a very reasonable number. So the other thing, and Melissa, I hope you will do this in your presentation, cover this. When we did the cost of service study, they found that the commercial was not, they were being subsidized also. And it was like, they should have been charged like a 22% increase. They felt at the time that that was too big of a jump to do, so they did like an 11% increase, meaning I assumed that they were going to go back and do the second 11% in coming years. I do not believe that has happened. So you can, if you could verify that for me and discover, if you can look into that. So there's a lot of factors here, and this is it's a pretty complicated issue. But that doesn't mean that we can't make changes now without spending more money to do that. So, but eventually we probably need some better analysis than what we have now. So, and whether it's cost of service or whether it's looking at our own data, but we have a lot to do, I think, to in order to get to where we need to be. Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with you, Wanda. And no, I don't. I believe that it was a one stage and not a two-stage action. And that's certainly my memory. There's always a lot of things that hit us. We've been sitting on this cost of service study for a couple of years now, that it's been sitting there in the budget with the money continuing to roll over because we didn't have the data and because we were waiting on a lawsuit. So it's my understanding that we actually have the data, the stuff that we needed to, the measurements that we needed to proceed, that we've been waiting on for a while. So I'm loath to let things go too much longer because it's been 2 years in the pipeline, and yes, we finally have a data that would at least allow us to move forward. So I'm afraid of things getting lost, just like you're saying. We said we were going to come back again to do a follow-up bump to bring the commercial to where it should be. There's always a lot of follow-up, and the longer it gets, the more the follow-up gets lost. So I do think it's very important. We can't bind future councils, but I think we should look at doing what we can do, right now. But I do think that it's important to remember that that cost of service has been bumped 2 years now, and the data is finally here, and at some point we need to move forward. And that doesn't mean we can't pay attention to all the things that you pointed out. But one of the things that it particularly points out is that when people are saying we're at cost, we're not counting any salaries. That cost is just cost of water. There isn't any cost of salary in that. And that's misleading to say we're at cost in that case. So thank you very much. And I do appreciate all the work that you put in, because it is a hard thing to get people's mind around, and you did a really good job, putting in there. And it's always easy to be the editor, but I appreciate your effort and your energy and your thoughtfulness in putting it out. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Reeds.
You are correct on the cost. It is the contract cost. So yes.
Councilmember Ellett.
Thank you. Let me go back to the comment that was made earlier about the data. We say we have data, but at the beginning of the presentation, I heard we can't even come up with what the assessment should be, or the cost-based analysis of how much the people, the salaries and benefits were charged into the various items here. I understand that's not accurate and hasn't been reviewed in quite a while. So when we say we have data, yes, we have lots of data. I don't know how accurate some of that data is, number one. Number two, and let me just echo, garbage in, garbage out for any cost of service study. And the third thing is, why the pressure to do a cost of service study so fast? Okay, it's been on the shelf for 2 years. If it's on the shelf for 3 years, why does it matter? We have so much work to do, so much analysis we can do on the data we have. Why not start there? Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
I guess the reason to start there is that it's the only defensible place to go if you want to actually have a solvent utility. If you have a utility attorney, and I think we're really blessed in the new firm, is that we, as far as I know, the Knight firm has a really excellent utility person who used to be a PUC judge, is my understanding. So I think we're very blessed with our new firm to possibly be able to get some really excellent advice in here. I think that there's certainly some things in our utility that are questionably defensible, and that we really need to have a rate study to defend. And as a utility, you should do that as the city administrator was saying, every 5 years or so. We're past that 5 years. So just being a good business, being a good utility, we should do that on a regular basis to be able to defend our costs. But particularly because you do need to start somewhere, and it is part of the business model that we do this on a regular basis. And you know, we can certainly pay attention to fixing all these things, but I believe that there's, you know, pending litigation that could use that kind of backup. And as I've heard from a utility attorney, this is, if we make up our own numbers, those numbers are always are a lot more subject to litigation. The gold standard is a cost of service study, and that's what we need to have as the business that we are. We are a business, and we should have the sufficient backup to justify our rates. So that would be my answer to that. But thank you very much for the question.
Councilmember Ellett?
Yes, I'm not aware of any pending litigation. So, could city administrator enlighten me on that?
She's referring to the pending litigation outside of our city that has been the reason we haven't had a rate increase. So we've been waiting for the outcome of the litigation against, I believe, is it City of Austin, Sylvia?
City of Austin.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. There is no pending litigation against us, correct?
Not against us, but it is pending litigation that has been the justification for not increasing our rates for the last 2, maybe more budget cycles.
Okay, thank you.
Tonight's item is a presentation item. Do we have any additional questions or comments from either council members, staff, or anybody who might be attending as part of the public this evening?
There, Mr. Carmona's hand. Oh, there it goes. I was going to say it's been flickering on and off.
Alfonso?
Oh,
Hello.
can you hear me?
We can.
Hello?
Hi.
Yep. Hello?
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think that it's nice that everybody's working and everybody try to put their effort. But that doesn't mean that we need to analyze that effort. And when I say that, first, when they are talking about the data, they are talking which kind of data? The data that the city present or the data that Melissa, she mentioned. So because we need to be accurate. The second is, and Rudy Rosengarten, she mentioned that the budget and finance, they cut the subsidize. If they cut subsidize, yeah, how in the world we will pay for that? Or unless you put rates, because it's no magic from where will come the money to pay for that. So in that slides, they didn't put also the infrastructure. We need to spend over $200,000 in water and wastewater infrastructure. So it's not 400,000, will be 600,000. So now looking the number I sent to everybody of the members of the city council, 63 people or 63 houses, they are using over 50,000, they are using over 20,000 gallons. We have houses that they are using 95,000 gallons. We have other houses, 50,000 gallons. So the people is using a lot. So in that tables, when I compare, and it's real numbers, City of Austin and City of Sunset Valley, people that they are using over 20,000 gallons, they pay in Sunset Valley $107. And the same users In the city of Austin, they pay $432. So it's a big, big change. Now, if I was a politician, for me it's difficult than the people, than they are 27% of the houses, they have mainly that subsidy. Not everybody. The city of Austin, they have additional tiers, fixed charge, monthly charge, reserve surcharge, community benefit, cost. So with all of that, the monthly average bill that is for the city of Austin is $11 for people that they don't pay too much. It's a community benefit. Here is $9 with 14 cents. So if you don't understand the tables, you cannot say that is not accurate information. Means that first we need to talk. Perhaps at this moment it's too much. And hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? Well,
We can hear you.
When I hear everybody. If they are making noise, it's very difficult. Now, I am talking as a technical person. I made the numbers and I am behind my numbers. So behind my numbers is true. This is why I made that. Because it's true that they pay more in the city of Austin, but it's not with the same proportion than the users in the city of Sunset Valley. So it's not the same for 63 houses to pay $107 than they will have to pay $432. We are not counting that we have 19 wells, 55 swimming pools, and in some of these, we don't have that. I don't want to have the study at this moment. I want that we will work with more analysis. This is my intention. So it's hard for me in 4 minutes to explain to you, but I appreciate that you allow me to talk. And the main intention for me is that we need to analyze at this moment. We have to have at this moment, because that will affect not only the residents, the commercial. With $18 for the solid waste, we don't pay $600,000. So it's the same. And some of that points, with all respect, they were members of that committee, the finance committee. And now, if they are doing only patching, when I came in 2016, I saw the problem. And oh no, don't move too much. The city is making too much money, and we don't want to give it to the administration, because if not, they will be using as they wanted. It's much better to use for our utilities. Now the economy and the sales, they went down, and now we need to start doing something. But I think the most important is to analyze. If I made all of this, is because I was desperate, because I don't want that we will come back to the management of one business as a house, as a small house. This is a business for so many residents and business, commercial. So we need to do this professional. I know that we have guys in the city that we can work together. We don't need to do that study if we can propose together to do something, but we need to come open. And I don't care if somebody is my friend or not. If he's abusing of water, he has to pay for that. So this is the difference. So for me at this moment, I think that we have different cities. When I was doing this, I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cities. So we can work with that 7 cities and try to find which model is much better for us. We have guys that they have that experience. We have engineers in the city. We can work together. We can save the $20,000 that could be the study, but we need to work together. Don't put $18 or put $1 here. No, this will be very difficult, not only for the residents, it's also for our business community, because only account, you put in your presentation 400 something thousand subsidies, 400,000. But you didn't put infrastructure.
Wrap up, please?
Yeah. So in a few words, I propose then we will continue in the same way that they are doing and wait until we will have a better picture of the sales tax. When we will have a better picture with the sales tax, at that time, we will have some basis, and with real revenue, we can work with the priorities and we can propose to the public how it can be the new cost, if it's the new cost of utilities. This is my intention. So don't be confused, please. And thank you for listening to me and giving to me extra time. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Charles Goyette, you have the floor. Charles, you are self-muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought I was out of that habit, but no. It's just waiting too long, waiting too long to speak.
We can hear
Anyway,
you. So you're on and you have the floor now. Oh, and actually, would you, I had been forgetting to do this and a resident pointed it out. I forget that not everybody is looking at a computer screen and seeing a list of names. And we do have some participants who are either on only by phone or are listening only by, even if they're logged on through a computer, they are listening through headphones or maybe not looking at a computer screen with names. So if we could, if I haven't called you as a council member, if you would please introduce yourself by name and address or entity if you're not a resident.
okay, very well. Yes, my name is Charles Goyette. I'm a Sunset Valley resident. And couple quick points. What Alfonso had to say, I saw his study. And what really impressed me about that study was the multi-tier structure, that virtually all of our community environments, so community cities have. And I think in that multi-tiered structure, there's a lot of room to make a more precise formula, and a formula like what Alfonso was leading to, that very high users could pay a little more. I mean, they seem to be able to afford it. They can pay a little more, and it's not like anybody has to use 50,000 gallons a year of water or a month, whatever the deal is. I mean, people can, if they can't afford a higher rate, they can back off. Maybe their grass doesn't look so nice, but I mean, anyway, I don't want to belabor that, but I thought that multi-tiered arrangement was compelling. And yes, I do believe that as Council Member Ellett was talking about as well, we have data to work with, but as Alfonso said, we need to analyze that data, and we need to be more comprehensive in terms of our approach before we jump at something and nibble around the edges. I think we got to make something a little bit more comprehensive and well thought through. And I was just thinking of something else that I had brought up earlier in terms of the solid waste situation we have, and the fact that it's grossly over budget, if you will, compared to the amount of money that it receives versus the outgo. And I was just wondering, I don't know about anyone else, but especially people that conserve. I mean, I know that my recycle bin is probably, I bet you I collect 4 times more recycled material than I do trash. And every other week, trash pickup arrangement, I think, could be accommodated without any real difficulty. And, that would cut our costs in half right there. And one other thing, I mean, if the utility costs really significantly get impacted, as some people seem to want to do in this city, perhaps the city allows some people to opt out of various programs. Like maybe they don't want to be part of the green waste program, or I don't know if that's practical, or just trash pickup. Maybe they do it themselves. I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas that gives people maximum flexibility and freedom to not be impositioned by the city, to be able to have as much control of their lives as possible. And I mean, considering what we're going through right now, I think that's an appropriate and reasonable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional comments on item number 10? Seeing none, I will move to our final item of the evening, item number 11, which is also a presentation item, is presentation of economic development tools and opportunities for the attraction and retention of retail businesses. This item is co-sponsored by Councilmember Rosengarten and Councilmember Ellett. Sylvia, if you would start off the presentation and then hand it off as necessary to the council members.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. This really is just a summation of some economic development material that we received at a TML conference that was attended by council members Rosengarten, Ellett, Gonzalez, myself, and Matt. I believe the conference was back in October. And it stemmed from some questions as to what do we actually have in our toolbox to be able to provide support. And there's been ancillary conversation about venue tax, switching off the venue tax, what can we do with any monies? You heard the dividend question earlier today. And so if, I'm not sure if Councilmember Ellett or Councilmember Rosengarten want to take this on, or I will continue the presentation.
Councilmember Ellett.
You're the best. Sylvia, I think you're the best person to drive this. What we're trying to do here is summarize what we learned at the TML conference that we attended, I think it was late last year, where they outlined a lot of tools that a city could have in attracting businesses or developing businesses. And I just wanted the public, our residents, to see these. And no action is required. It's just an educational process. And I think Sylvia, as we learned at that conference, is the best person to present this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's quite a variety of tools in the toolbox. Unfortunately, in Sunset Valley, we're limited to the tools because, one, we are capped at our sales tax already. We don't have a property tax. We don't have any 380 agreements as of yet that we could use. And then there are no public improvement districts that have been requested to be created. So I will go through each of these, and then I'll also touch on an email that the council received on the venue tax. So applicable to Sunset Valley. Right now, we have the ability to do a 380 agreement, which is in essence a refund of sales tax to a particular entity who we enter into an agreement with based on some performance metrics and some agreed upon legislative action. We would have the ability to create a public improvement district, which is basically a cost share and a debt burden that's carried jointly by the city and the developer. In the future, if we were able to have some room in our sales tax, we could look at a municipal development district, or we could look at a type A or type B board. Type A and type B is the question that was posed about the venue tax early on, so I'll touch on that as I go through the presentation. So I mentioned before, if we had room in our sales tax, we could create a municipal development district. I had one of these in Aransas Pass, and it created a pool, and it created a civic center. What the municipal development district does, as well as type A and type B boards, is one, they're very heavy in legislation. They do require a separate board to be appointed. Sometimes it's the council, sometimes it's not, so you add a layer. These boards are also able to carry debt, and any revenue that is received, these boards can borrow money and they pledge those revenue bonds against that debt. That's how we were able to build the civic center, and that's how we were able to build an aquatic center. The difficulty with municipal development districts is they don't go away until the debt is satisfied. And even then you have operational expenses. And I will tell you that a pool is very expensive to operate, very expensive. What Aransas Pass found itself in when I came on as the city manager is the board recognized how expensive the pool was to operate and then turned it over to the city. And so they freed up those bonds and they built the Civic Center and then found out the Civic Center was very expensive to operate. So there's a lot of wiggle room within the municipal development district, and I would just caution at any points in the future going down that path how this is made up and what projects and things we would ever consider. Type A and Type B boards are specifically for projects that create jobs. And Type A, they're more industrial. Type B, they're a little bit wider. The question was posed on the venue tax. There was a question as to whether a venue tax was legal, and the legislation that was read under the Type A and Type B boards, which cannot fund a watershed protection project. We've since asked for input from TML. TML clarified that the revenue manual was incorrect. The venue tax is an appropriate use, and the watershed protection is an appropriate use of sales tax. So in this particular area, the city's maxed out, so there's no available sales tax to use. We have the potential in the future, if the residents so desire, to move in that direction. And I give an example of perhaps a municipal development district. Let's say the city wanted to build an open space amphitheater at Homestead Park, the Cougar Creek Greenbelt. And let's say there was room in the sales tax ceiling because the voters had voted down another tax, let's say the crime control tax, and had voted an MDD in its place. So the district could actually borrow money, build a natural space amphitheater under the tax code. They could build the project, pay the debt and maintenance with those funds. And then the district remains in place until the fund is paid, until the debt is paid in its entirety, and also some maintenance and operations. For a Type A and a Type B board, an example of that is, for example, the city wants to provide either low interest loans or grants to businesses within its jurisdiction to create or retain primary jobs. And these loans or grants are typically something that requires, an example that I have is a business that needed to have some street improvements done so that big 18-wheelers could make the turns, and there were some improvements that were needed within the street. But that would have been on the developer side to pay because there was private improvements along that. The city would have participated, provided a grant or a loan to have the business be able to do that. In Corpus Christi, I believe this was Andrews Distributing. And again, we don't have any room in our sales tax. Something would need to be voted down in order to be able to have one of these put in its place. So an example for a Type A board is, let's say the city wanted to partner with a corporation to build a small distribution warehouse on the Uplands property. So the city could use Type A monies to purchase additional adjacent land, and also for the cost of the buildings and equipment, any expenditures or infrastructure or improvements for the project. So Type A and Type B boards are really economic drivers in cities who have them. Again, they're very heavy board oversight. They are sort of their own entity. They have public meetings. They have to provide financial performance and things to the public. A Type B board is a little bit different. A Type B is really amenities, parks, sports venues. So in this example, the city, let's say, wanted to build a regional park amenity at Lone Oak. And so we wanted to build an artist venue or something like that, and a related store, restaurant, or concession area on that Lone Oak property. Type B funds could be used to pay for something like that. So a property tax, and again, I don't want to freak anybody out. Nobody's intending to bring forward a property tax, but there was a question, if we had a property tax, what could we do to stimulate the economy with property tax dollars? And you heard earlier the discussion about, could I give a rebate to the residents? Well, we call that a rollback. We call that a reduction of the property tax. It's not necessarily a rebate, but if you had a property tax, that's what you'd be able to do. The other thing is you'd be able to create a TERS, an increment reinvestment zone, and within that zone have a tax increment finance. So we'd have to do some work with Travis County and the other taxing entities, but essentially what that does is it freezes the rates, not for anybody but the receiving entities. So if you own property within a TERS and your property was initially assessed at $100,000, all of the entities continue to receive their $100,000, the value, the tax on that $100,000, and any increments above that $100,000 as the years go into this TIF. And that TIF is used to pay for roads improvements and other economic stimulus that would generate more businesses and things within that zone. So let's say we had a property tax. And again, there's no intention to implement a property tax. So if the city wanted to develop an area along the 290 corridor and we had a developer who owned some property there and some businesses that were intentional in what they wanted to build, some improved roadways, those kinds of things, we could create a reinvestment corridor, seed a board, and then as valuation increases within that corridor, deposit those into the TERS account. We can pay for beautification, improved infrastructure along that corridor to attract additional businesses. And the idea is that that fund creates its own money and then begins to have traction and can begin to invest and attract. Special assessments have gained popularity in our state, especially within the Central Texas region and in areas where growth happens so rapidly that the city can't keep up, especially with infrastructure. And so we call these PIDs, a public improvement district. And so basically, you would need a petition by the property owners. Let's say there was a boundary of, I don't know, 100 acres. And there was 100 property owners within those 100 acres. 51 of the property owners would need to petition the city and say, we want to have improved something, improved roadways, improved landscaping, improved lighting, improved park amenities, these things that have a public interest and have a public benefit. So if the project were to cost, you know, $1 million, I give an example down here. So if the project would cost $1 million, it's split among the owners. The city up front funds the project and the owners pay the city back at 0.5% above the city's rate. So you can see why developers, especially the Buc-ee's area in New Braunfels, this is a perfect example of a PID. When there's an established need for infrastructure, water, sewer, those kinds of things that are expensive in the development part, and the developer needs to put it in, but they also need some assurance at the bank that the city is going to pay those things back. That's a PID. So an example for Sunset Valley is, let's say the Village Shopping Center wanted to completely redo its center and was seeking assistance from the city. So the city, it could petition the city and other owners along Brody to create, among other things, improved lighting along that Brody section, maybe some improved turning lanes within that Brody section. Maybe there's a public green space or an amphitheater area in that area, let's say behind docks or in some of that area. Improve trailheads and access points, and let's say the costs for all of that are $5 million. So the city would borrow or upfront pay that $5 million, and let's say we borrowed it at 3% interest. Then we would special assess against all of that property at 3.5% interest over a period of years, and that's how the city would recoup its dollars. For the developer, it's almost an additional line of credit. It's almost an additional access to capital that allows them to get their project done that much quicker. And there's the big other category. This is also a very popular category, and they are 380 agreements, and they are basically a program that grants funds or services at little or no cost to promote economic development. This is usually in a rebate of sales tax, and that the maximum that we can do is 50%. So an example of a 380 agreement, and these vary widely. It is dependent on developer need and city participation. So let's say a retailer were to approach the city and wanted to revamp the Kohl's location, and they're seeking $10 million in assistance to relocate. Among other things, under a 380, the city could purchase that land and sell it at a discount to Apple. Then it could refund 50% of the sales tax collected until $10 million or 10 years is reached. The difficulty with all of these is really you are entering into a contract. And what happened during COVID and some of the other Harvey and when a city is hit hard is these are contractual agreements that you've entered into. Yes, there are clauses outside of the contract, but the developer has expended the dollars or has guaranteed to its shareholders and things that these monies are going to be received. So for Sunset Valley, for example, when we have a dip in sales tax, one of the first things that we have to pay is our contractual agreements. And so we may have very limited ability after those contractual agreements are paid to do anything else if the dip is, for example, as we thought it was going to be with COVID. So all of them have pluses and minuses. All of them have risk. It just depends on how risk or non-risk averse the city is. And every 380 is absolutely different. They're probably the most widely used within the state for economic development. Again, there's no action proposed, and I'll open it up to any questions or council direction.
Councilmember Ellett.
Sylvia, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. And I understand there's no action tonight, and I just wanted us to have know all of the arrows that were in our quiver, essentially, as we look forward to what to do next and to attract businesses or attract retail stores or whatever we decide to do, or the residents decide to do. It seems to me the 380 has a lot of pros and cons. The 380, the pros is it's the least disruptive to the way we do business today. And the con of that is you have to be very careful in putting that contract together. And you have to be very careful of understanding how this can go wrong. And, no one could have predicted the COVID-19 and putting together the 380. But the lesson learned from this is you do have to look at things like that. Yes, it gives us a lot of flexibility. Yes, it appeals, I think, to, if we were to talk to an IKEA, and I'm making these up, or an Apple store, I can understand why they would like this. But at the same time, putting essentially bookends around this is, I think, critical in anything like this. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. There are things that you would need to put into the contract to protect the city. And I think part two to that is there's always the piece about performance measures that are missing, because the thing about all of these is they should be mutually beneficial, not just to the retailer or the developer, but to the city as well. I mean, the whole purpose for the agreement is that the city and the residents see some benefit to having this particular retailer, this particular business, et cetera, here, because it's attracting jobs, it's adding more to the sales tax base. If we had a property tax, we could say it's adding to the property tax base or adding to our utility funds, those kinds of things. So my only caveat would be that we really look, if we're going to be considering these, that make sure that whatever we tell the developer the expectation is clear in the contract, and that we are getting that deliverable or that performance. And if not, we have a way out of the agreement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any additional council members? Any additional comments or questions from council members? And then same question for the public. Are there any additional questions or comments for either council members or staff? Sylvia, is there anything you want to say in closing?
I mean, that's it.
Council members, is there anything that we missed before I call for a motion to adjourn? Councilmember Medicus?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Councilmember Gonzalez, are you the second?
I am.
Councilmembers, if you would please cast your vote in the chat. All those in favor say aye.
Okay, Councilmember Rosengarten, aye. Councilmember Medicus, aye. Councilmember Ellett, aye. Councilmember Reeds, aye. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Aye. Aye.
Oh, aye. There you go.
Great, thank you. Everybody, we are adjourned at 9:42 p.m. Thank you.